Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Back in 1980, I was attending Chipola Junior College in Marianna, Florida. I lived in the dorm, where I worked the reception desk every weekend. Most weekends, I was the only one working, which meant I spent a lot of time alone in the dorm. One Sunday afternoon, after my roommates and suite mates had returned from visiting their families, I helped them unload their cars. They always brought back great groceries, so it was always a fun task. As I carried some of my roommates' things into our room, I passed through the bathroom on my way back. Now, the layout of the rooms in the dorm was a little strange. There were two rooms connected by a shared bathroom, and this was considered a suite. As I walked through the bathroom, I glanced to my right. The space was small, only the width of the shower entrance, but enough to catch my attention. There, standing in the corner, was a young woman. She was medium height with long, straight dark hair parted in the middle. She wore a blue and red rugby-style shirt that seemed straight out of the early 70s. Immediately, I realized she didn't belong in our dorm. In a quick moment of panic, I turned away, and when I looked back, she was gone. I ran to find my suite mates and roommate, who were still unloading their cars. I was bubbling with excitement, half expecting them to think I was crazy, but to my surprise, they didn't. They were intrigued. We decided that the next day, we'd ask Mrs. Ryan, the cleaning lady who had worked in our dorm for years, if she knew of any girl who had lived in our room and died. Mrs. Ryan was a trusted source, and if anyone would know, it would be her. The next day, after our classes, we tracked down Mrs. Ryan in the laundry room. I described the girl I'd seen, and after a pause, she told us she did remember a young woman fitting that description, a girl who had died in a car accident some time ago. For a few weeks, I convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. After all, it was just a brief glimpse. But then another weekend came, and once again, my suspicions proved true. It was a Saturday night, and I had been out with my cousin and a friend. Our curfew was 2 a.m., but I made it back to the dorm by midnight and went straight to bed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of running water. The sink in the bathroom was on, and I immediately assumed it was my suite mate returning from her date. The water ran for what felt like forever, and eventually, I grew frustrated. I decided to get up and turn it off. The next morning, I went into my suite mate's room to ask why she'd left the water running, but she wasn't there. I assumed she had gone out for breakfast. When she came back later that evening, I asked her why she'd left the water on. She gave me a confused look and asked, "What are you talking about?" I explained, "You know, last night when you came back from your date, you turned the water on and left it running." She stared at me wide-eyed and said, "I wasn't even in town last night. I was at my parents' house all weekend." That's when I knew for sure. My dark-haired friend from the bathroom wanted to make sure I knew she was still around. After that night, I never saw her again, and I had no more strange experiences in the dorm. But I'm certain she was real. Whether she was a lingering spirit, a memory, or something else entirely, I don't know. But to this day, I believe she was trying to make her presence known. And she did, loud and clear. When I was 16, I had one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I was in my bedroom, crafting some hard rock music on my new synthesizer. It was a lazy afternoon when my mother came in and told me that she and my dad were heading to the grocery store. I barely acknowledged her, giving that typical teenage shrug that says, "Yeah, okay, whatever, bye." Soon after they left, the sky began to darken ominously. Rain seemed imminent. My bedroom window was open, and it had always been a bit of a challenge. The window was old and stuck in place, requiring nearly all the strength I had to open it, and closing it was even harder. So, for all intents and purposes, it stayed open, rain or shine. I cranked up the volume on my amplifier, lost in the throes of creating my music, when something odd happened. The attic door, an old 1930s style door inside my room, suddenly swung open. Startled, I quickly hit the stop button on my synth and turned around to see the door fully open. My mind, although stunned, quickly tried to rationalize it. The window's open, and it must have been a draft that caused the door to swing open, I told myself. With my logical explanation in place, I shrugged it off and returned to my music. But then, no more than 10 seconds later, the attic door slammed shut, loudly. This time, I noticed something strange. There was no breeze. The curtains around my window weren't even rustling. That was weird. I muttered to myself, my heart racing. Still, I couldn't shake the logical part of my mind that insisted it was just a coincidence. I took a deep breath and decided to continue. I pressed the start button again, hoping to focus on my music. But no sooner had I started playing than the attic door slammed open with such force that the entire room seemed to shake, only to slam shut again just as quickly. This time, every hair on my body stood on end, and I was frozen with fear. I felt a heavy, oppressive presence behind me, as if someone, or something, was standing just inches away, breathing down my neck. A surge of terror washed over me. I wanted to run, but instead, I found myself slowly walking toward the window. I was only a few steps away when the window suddenly slammed shut with a violent crash, the glass shattering inward. Instinctively, I sprang into action. I leaped toward the door, yanked it open, and bolted down the stairs, skipping half the steps in my haste. I tore open the front door and sprinted into the front yard, not stopping until I was standing in the rain, staring up at my bedroom window. I remained there for what felt like an eternity, utterly stunned, until my parents returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had been in the room with me. For a long time, I tried to rationalize what had happened. The logical explanation, air pressure causing the door to move, vibrations from my loud music freeing the old window, and a fear response to being startled, made sense, even though I couldn't explain the palpable sense of dread that accompanied it. But then something else happened, something that shifted my perception entirely. The next evening, after abandoning my hard rock music, I sat down to work on a softer ballad, a genre I'd never really explored before. As I composed, something strange occurred. A soft scent of roses suddenly filled the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Perhaps it was a passing breeze from outside, I thought. But the smell grew stronger, filling the air in a way that was almost impossible to ignore. Curious, and admittedly a bit cautious from the previous night's events, I walked toward the attic door. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, but the fear I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. Slowly, I opened the attic door. The smell of roses was overwhelming now, much stronger than it had been in my room. It lingered in the attic stairwell, thick and intoxicating, like it was waiting for me. At that moment, all my lingering fear evaporated. Instead of terror, I felt a strange wave of inspiration wash over me, and my music seemed to flow effortlessly from that point onward. That night, I finished my first love ballad, my first real song, and to this day, it remains one of my proudest compositions. I'll never forget the strange way the atmosphere in the room shifted, from fear to inspiration, as if whatever presence had been there before had somehow blessed my music with its own quiet, unspoken encouragement. When my kids were little, my oldest, Ben, was just 3 years old and our baby, Mackenzie, was only 6 months old. We had this stereo system. It was a pretty good one, picked out by my husband, of course. You know how it is, boys and their toys. He was so proud of it. We'd had it for about a year without any issues, and everything seemed fine until one strange night. It was well past midnight when we were woken up by the loudest noise. The stereo had somehow turned on and was blaring a CD at full volume. I jumped out of bed, and my husband followed close behind. We rushed downstairs, half awake, and found the stereo blasting away, but nothing seemed out of place. The equipment was fine, the CD was still playing, and yet the volume was turned all the way up. We quickly turned it off, trying not to wake the neighbors, and stood there confused. Ben, our oldest, was still upstairs in his room. He wasn't quite old enough to go down the stairs by himself, so we knew he wasn't behind it. Mackenzie, the baby, was safely in her crib, so there was no way she could have gotten to it. The stereo was high up on a shelf to keep it out of their reach, both for their safety and to keep my husband's precious equipment away from sticky fingers. We always followed a simple rule. Before turning it on, the volume had to be all the way down to 0. This way, the speakers wouldn't blow out when the stereo powered up. So how had it happened? I figured it was just some odd glitch. My husband, though, was convinced I'd somehow been careless with the controls. We didn't argue. We simply went back to bed, still unsure of what had caused the noise. The next night it happened again. The loud music jolted us awake, and once again we rushed down to shut it off. This time, we thought maybe it was the power bar. After all, the TV, VCR, and game systems were all plugged into the same surge protector. If there had been some sort of power surge, it should have affected everything plugged into it, not just the stereo. But nothing else had turned on. I was starting to feel uneasy. My husband, though, was more practical about it. He thought maybe the stereo receiver itself was defective, so we made an appointment to have it serviced. The technician who answered the phone wasn't exactly helpful. She thought we were overreacting, but because the warranty had just barely expired, she agreed to set up an appointment for 2 days later. In the meantime, the stereo continued to wake us every night. Each morning, we turned it off and tried to forget about it, but it was hard to shake the unease. Finally, after almost a week, the stereo was returned from the service center. The technician claimed they couldn't find anything wrong. He said he had replaced a part inside, and that should fix the issue. We didn't think much of it at the time. We were just relieved to have it back. But then, one night, it happened again. The stereo blasted music in the middle of the night. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. My husband quickly unplugged it, and we both stared at the stereo in disbelief. How was this happening? The next night, the stereo blared again, and when we checked, it was plugged in. At that point, my husband was frustrated. He called the service center again, and this time, they were a bit more responsive. They couldn't find anything wrong with it again, but to keep us happy, they agreed to replace the receiver with a brand new one, the next model up. We were skeptical but grateful. After the swap, the problem finally stopped. We never heard that strange music again. In fact, the stereo still works perfectly today. My kids use it now, hooked up to their TV and game systems. Looking back, I still have no explanation for what happened. Maybe it was some electrical glitch, or maybe it was something more unusual. Perhaps we just had a bored music lover passing through. I can only hope they found a nice concert hall to take up residence in. Whatever it was, I'm just glad it's over. One night, my cousins and best friend came over, and we all hung out in my room. It was me, Darian, Layla, JJ, and Josh, and Amanda was in Darian's room, playing on the computer. We had the lights off, just like we used to when we were little. We were reading ghost stories aloud, taking turns to see who would get scared first and jump for the light. It was fun, until something changed. JJ found some of my old stories, ones I'd written a while ago. When we started reading them, everyone's mood shifted. It was like the air grew heavier, and suddenly, the room felt colder. We kept reading, though, until we heard something, a faint noise like something small had fallen. Then we heard what sounded like tiny footsteps, quick and light, like a mouse scurrying across the floor. Now I know for a fact we don't have mice in the house, so we all looked over at once. I thought maybe someone had knocked my phone off the cradle onto the floor, but when we bent over the bed to look for it, we couldn't find it. We shrugged it off and continued, but the tension in the room hadn't gone away. Then the beeping started. It was slow at first, almost like the sound of a distant alarm, barely audible, but it quickly sped up, becoming louder and faster, as if the sound were coming from all directions, surrounding us. The beeping stopped suddenly, and the phone rang once, just one sharp ring. We all froze, staring at the phone, unsure of what to do. Someone grabbed their cell phone and called Amanda to make sure she was okay. She came into the room and turned on the light. We tried to explain what had happened, but she just looked at us like we were all losing our minds. That's when JJ froze. His face went pale, and he said his arm was numb, that he couldn't feel it. I reached over to touch it and immediately noticed how cold his arm was compared to the other. It felt almost unnatural, like it had been exposed to ice for a long time. An hour later, a large bruise formed on his cold arm, shaped like a palm, like someone had grabbed him with a strong, forceful grip. This all happened around 3:40 a.m., if that means anything. I wasn't sure if it was just the time or something more. We spent the rest of the night trying to make sense of it all. I asterisked 69, the number that had called, and when it came back, it was my friend's number. But she would never call me that late at night, especially not at 3:40 a.m. And then JJ, being the curious one, started researching the beeps. He discovered that when you divide the number of beeps by another number, it all added up to 666. We didn't know what to make of that. It felt creepy, unsettling. Then there was the oddest thing. When we took a picture in my room after turning off the lights, we noticed something strange in the corner. 3 orbs appeared in the photo. We'd never seen them before, and I didn't know what to think of it. It was the first time I'd ever seen something like that, and I'm not sure what to make of it yet, but I'll try to get the picture up if I can. There's more too. Lately, Darian's been hearing whispers in his room. A few times I've sworn I heard my mom's voice calling me through the door, only to find her asleep in her room, snoring away. And Darian keeps hearing a voice to say, "Drop it," like it's someone telling him to let go of something invisible. It's hard to explain. We've been chalking it up to paranoia or stress, but honestly, I think something else might be going on. Maybe we stirred something up that was better left alone. I don't know. It's just getting a little too weird. My partner and I moved into an old army barracks that had been around for more than 150 years. Over time, the building had been converted into 4 connected homes. A lot of tragic events had happened there, and when the house became available for rent, we didn't know much about its history at first. The previous tenant, a girl, had overdosed and died in our bedroom. It was unsettling, but we decided to move in anyway, hoping for a fresh start. Corey worked long shifts, often 5 to 6 nights a week, from 9 p.m. until sometimes as late as 6 a.m. the following morning. During those nights, I spent most of the time alone in the house, and strange things started happening almost immediately. When Corey would get home after work, I could always hear him coming in through the front door. I'd wait for him to come into the bedroom and kiss me before I fell asleep. But there were nights when I woke up to find him sitting at the edge of the bed, just staring at me. I always assumed he had just come home from his shift, but one night something felt different. I had a strong sense that someone was in the room, and at first, I thought it was just Corey returning from work. As I opened my eyes a little, I saw something, a black shape, hovering right in front of me. I panicked and screamed, instinctively swinging my arm toward it. In that moment, I shut my eyes tight, not wanting to see what was happening. When I finally opened them again, the black shape was gone. But to my surprise, Corey wasn't sitting on the edge of the bed, as I had expected. I remembered he hadn't worked that night. He told me that something had woken him up just 10 minutes before I screamed. It was strange, almost as if we both felt something at the same time. I always left the light on in the lounge room so that the glow would spill into our bedroom. I couldn't stand the thought of being in the dark in that house, especially after everything I'd heard about its past. The light provided a sense of security, but that night, the shape I saw wasn't a shadow. It felt different. Because of Corey's night shifts, I often found myself alone in bed, and almost every time I was alone, I had the unsettling feeling that I wasn't the only one in the room. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans of an old house. I could almost feel someone standing beside the bed, watching me. Sometimes I would turn over, facing the wall, and try to sleep with my back to whatever was there. I convinced myself that it was just the spirit of someone watching over me while Corey was at work, but it didn't make it any less frightening. The sensation of being watched became almost a nightly occurrence, and while I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself it was harmless, a part of me always feared that there was something more to it. That feeling never really went away. I know people will probably think I'm crazy, but I swear on my immortal soul that this happened. For weeks, I've been grappling with the presence of what I can only describe as shadow people. I was certain that communication was the only way to make sense of the situation, so I decided to try something bold. 2 nights ago, I took the first steps. It wasn't long before I got a response, though even as I sat there, experiencing it, I couldn't believe it was really happening. I went into my room that night with nothing but a flashlight and what I'll admit was a little false courage. It was exactly 11:00 p.m. I remember because I had started taking notes in a notebook, hoping to track the time and any responses I might get. I didn't have any recording devices, no digital recorder, no camera. All I had was the pen and paper, and whatever came next. I sat on my bed, the room lit only by the flashlight tucked tightly against my side. I turned the light off, closed the door behind me, and shut out any outside distractions. I took a deep breath and asked, "If there is any entity present, please make yourself known." I waited. Nothing. I repeated the question several times, asking variations like, "Can you make a noise so I know you're here? Could you manifest? Why are you here?" But as time went on and silence lingered, I began to feel like a fool. Just as I started to get up to turn on the light, a loud crackle echoed from the foot of my bed. I glanced at the clock. 12:37 a.m. I quickly scribbled it down in my notebook. Then I sat still, listening. The crackling continued. I got up cautiously and traced the sound. It was coming from the speakers of my stereo, sitting on a shelf at the foot of my bed. I moved over with my flashlight, scanning the wires to see if there was anything wrong. I found nothing. Then I made a decision, one that would give this experience weight. I unplugged the stereo. I returned to my bed, scanning the room once more before turning the flashlight off. I put my pencil to the paper and asked again, "Is there anyone in this room with me?" Almost immediately, the crackling returned. My heart raced. I knew for a fact that I'd unplugged the stereo. There was no reason it should be making that sound. But just to be sure, I checked it again with the flashlight. It was still unplugged. There was no power feeding into it. With trembling hands, I asked, "Could you communicate through the speakers?" A loud crackle followed, and this time I swear I heard something. Something like a voice, faint but unmistakable. I leaned closer, my pulse pounding in my ears, and asked, "What? Could you repeat that?" Another crackle. I marked it in the notebook as a response. This went on for what felt like hours, with me asking again and again, "Who is this? Why are you here?" The crackling seemed to intensify. At one point, I wrote down the time, 2:12 a.m. I'd been sitting there for over 3 hours, and still the sound persisted. Then, amidst the crackles, I swore I heard a voice. It wasn't clear, but I thought I caught the word "stay." I wrote it down, shaking. "What do you mean, stay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The static swelled, then another faint word, "never leave." I asked again, "Do you mean that you don't ever want me to leave?" "No," came the response. I asked, "Do you mean that you don't ever want to leave?" Static. I pressed further, "Do you wish to remain here in this room?" "Yes." Stay. "Why do you wish to stay?" More static. "Have you always been here?" Static. "Are you still here in this room with me?" Then I noted a sharp, high-pitched noise coming from the speakers. It sounded vaguely like a scream, a desperate, lingering sound. Right after that, I heard a click, like someone hanging up a phone. I don't remember much after that. According to the notebook, I'd fallen silent, but I can't recall the rest of the conversation. Could I have contacted something or someone? I've always been someone who wanted to believe in the paranormal, but I was a skeptic. Like most people, I needed to see it to believe it. I was about 15 or 16 at the time, dating someone who claimed his house was haunted. Now, this guy was the type who loved to exaggerate, and he often made up wild stories, so naturally, I didn't take his claims seriously. I figured he and his friends were just messing with me, especially since things only seemed to happen when his parents weren't around. There were little things, strange occurrences here and there, but nothing that convinced me. I always had an explanation. One thing I noticed was that his bedroom, despite being next to the furnace, was always freezing. No matter how warm the rest of the house was, his room felt like an entirely different climate. But I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just an old house with some quirks. Then one night we were watching TV in his room. He set his drink down on the table beside him, and as he came over to give me a hug, he turned to face his drink. Suddenly he pulled back and told me not to move. We sat there for a moment, and when he finally let go, he asked me to look at his drink. It had moved. It was no longer in the spot where he had left it. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe he moved it when I wasn't looking, or I thought maybe I had seen it wrong. But deep down, I couldn't explain it. Still, I wasn't convinced. That is, until later. There was also the slamming of doors in the house. He would point it out and say, "See, I told you." I would rush through the house, checking all the windows to prove it was just the wind causing it. But every time, the windows were closed and the sound of slamming doors persisted. I had no explanation for it. Still, I told myself it was all just coincidence, or maybe even the house settling. But what happened next was different. This was the moment that changed everything for me. One night we were alone again. I was sitting in a recliner, facing the bedroom door near the kitchen. We were watching TV when suddenly we heard the front door open. Footsteps followed, and we both froze. There was no greeting, no voices, just the sound of someone walking in. We looked at each other, confused, wondering who it could be. But before we could call out, we heard something walking across the kitchen floor, right in front of me. It was the most unsettling sound I've ever heard. The footsteps were slow and heavy, almost dragging, as if whatever was walking was carrying something incredibly weighty. It took one step, and then there was a dragging sound. And then another step, and more dragging. It was like nothing I had ever experienced. I knew with complete certainty that there was no one there, but I could hear the footsteps as clearly as if someone were walking right in front of me. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even look away. It was like my body was locked in place, unable to react. My heart raced, my mouth went dry, and tears started to run down my face. All I could do was sit there, shaking, my mind screaming that something was wrong, but my body just wouldn't respond. The footsteps continued across the kitchen, and then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The room went completely silent, as if nothing had happened. It was like the air had cleared, but I was still stuck in this terrifying state of disbelief. Hey, sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the video, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content. I finally snapped out of it, and the sheer terror overwhelmed me. I started screaming, and my anxiety and asthma flared up all at once. I couldn't breathe, my chest was tight, and I felt like I couldn't escape. It felt like everything in my body had gone into overdrive. Once I managed to calm down, I told him I needed to leave. I couldn't stay there any longer. I didn't care about anything else. I demanded to be taken home, and I never returned to that house again. The experience had shaken me to my core, and I couldn't explain what had happened, no matter how hard I tried. It was very early on Tuesday morning, July 16, when I suddenly woke up, though I can't say why. There was no noise, no movement, nothing that should have disturbed my sleep. But for some reason, I found myself sitting bolt upright, blinking in disbelief at the shadowy figure at the foot of my bed. In the dim light, it was difficult to make out her features, but I could feel her presence. She seemed to be smiling at me, and her clothes, loose, flowing, and old-fashioned, reminded me of something a woman from the Civil War era might wear, perhaps a slave girl. Her head was wrapped in a scarf, and everything about her felt distant, almost ethereal. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced. I shifted my gaze to the LED clock on my dresser. It was exactly 3:33 a.m. I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening. I am awake. I know I am not dreaming. I whispered to myself, trying to ground myself in reality. But as soon as I spoke, the figure began to fade. Within seconds, the woman's form dissolved into a misty, white outline, and then even that vanished. I sat there in stunned silence, looking at the spot where she had been. My 2 dogs, who had been sleeping at my feet, didn't stir. Not a twitch, not a movement. They were completely undisturbed. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream, but the dogs would have sensed her presence, wouldn't they? How could they sleep so soundly while I was wide awake, witnessing something so otherworldly? This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to me. The first encounter occurred over a decade ago in St. Louis. I woke up in a similar fashion, suddenly and with no apparent cause. At the foot of my bed stood a man, wearing a long trench coat and a fedora. At first, I thought he was an intruder, and fear gripped me. But as I stared at him, he faded into mist, just like the woman in my latest experience. The second encounter came a few years later in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This time, I woke up to find myself face to face with a small blonde-haired girl, no older than 5, wearing a pink dress. She hovered next to my nightstand, and I could feel her eyes on me. But instead of fading away, she floated through the wall and disappeared. I later discovered that the house had once belonged to a doctor and his family in the 1940s, and the doctor's young daughter had tragically passed away there. Now, with this most recent encounter, I'm left with more questions than answers. What does it all mean? Was there really a slave girl who once lived on this land? I've decided to visit the public library, hoping to find some clues. Maybe I'll discover something about the history of the land where my house stands, or maybe I won't. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've lived in my parents' house my entire life. From a very young age, something about it always felt off. There was an unease that settled in the corners of the rooms, a quiet discomfort that I couldn't quite explain. Little things would happen. Someone would always be missing something, or the lights would flicker and turn on by themselves. At first, I was confused, but eventually, I learned to accept these odd occurrences. It became just part of life. But about 2 years ago, things began to take a darker turn. I started waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling a heavy pressure on my chest, as though something or someone was pushing down on me. I couldn't explain it, but the sensation felt suffocating, almost like being pinned in place. Around the same time, my parents began fighting constantly. They had never been like this before, but now it was as if they couldn't stand each other. Their arguments were loud, relentless, and filled with a strange bitterness I had never heard from them. I couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with the strange things I had been experiencing in the house. I had started going to church a while before this, but after that night, the one where I woke up with the pressure on my chest, things escalated. I began seeing things out of the corner of my eye. It was subtle at first, just glimpses of a figure, like a man standing in the shadows or walking across a room. But every time I turned to look, there was nothing there, just empty space. Then, about 4 months ago, the sightings became more frequent. They didn't just happen occasionally anymore. They occurred almost every week, sometimes more. The nighttime disturbances continued as well. Things that had once been isolated incidents were now happening almost twice a week. I couldn't help but wonder if maybe I was losing my mind, until something happened a few weeks ago that made me realize I wasn't the only one experiencing this. A friend of mine, an EMT turned firefighter, had given me a ride home from church one evening. As I was about to get out of the car, he suddenly told me to wait. I turned to look at him, and I could see something odd in his eyes. He looked uneasy, like he had seen something that left him unsettled. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice tight. Confused, I asked, "What? What did you see?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "It looked like a man was standing next to your door." At first, I thought he was joking, so I laughed it off and said, "Oh, so you see him too?" "I see him all the time." But then he did something I didn't expect. He put his hand across my chest and said he didn't look so friendly. Suddenly, I felt a chill run through me. I quickly got out of the car and said goodbye, eager to get inside and out of the unsettling moment. But as I was walking towards the front door, fishing for my keys in my pocket, I heard him scream, "Hey!" And I looked up to see his high beams flashing on. I froze. That's when I saw it, the shadow of a man running away from me towards the neighbor's house. I looked around, but there was no one there. The shadow was solid, like it had a substance all its own. I took a step back, my heart racing. No person had cast the shadow. There was nothing to explain it. My friend shouted for me to stay safe, and without saying another word, I rushed inside, my hands shaking as I locked the door behind me. Since that night, things have only gotten worse. The sightings, the strange feelings, the tension, it all continues to grow. I tried to push it all out of my mind, but the fear lingers. I don't know what's happening in this house or what it all means. All I know is that it feels like something is watching, something that's not quite human, and it doesn't feel friendly at all. For quite some time, my family has been plagued by a presence, something we can't quite explain. It seems almost impossible to fall down the stairs in our house. Even when you start to trip, you always manage to stop yourself as if some invisible force is holding you up. But when you're going up the stairs, it's a different story. At least 45% of the time, you'll trip. Sometimes, I'll be halfway up, certain that I've cleared the last step, but then, almost immediately, I trip up the stairs again. Things were strange before my father's uncle passed away, but it became even more unsettling after he took his own life in our garage. Since then, it feels like whatever presence is here has grown stronger. The stairs aren't the only thing that's changed. There are times, especially when I'm sitting at the computer, when I'll feel like I'm being watched. It's a strange, cold sensation that lasts for a moment, and then it disappears. When I turn around, there's nothing there, but that feeling lingers, like I'm not alone. And sometimes, if the light is on behind me, I'll see something, a shadow, crossing the wall behind the computer. It's fleeting, but it's enough to make your skin crawl. One time, I saw something in the giant upstairs window, something I can't easily explain. I saw a figure, a shadow man, standing there, dark against the white wall. He didn't move much at first, just standing there. Then he turned and walked out of view. I jumped up to check, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. I would have seen him if he was still there, but there was nothing. Then there was the time with my cat. He was sitting on a chair when the screen door suddenly flew open. He bolted outside, and I quickly shut the door, planning to tell my dad about it. But when I returned, the cat was back inside, and the door was open again. I couldn't explain it. My father's uncle had always loved cats. It almost felt like something he might do, letting them in and out, even after everything. One day, when my mother told the spirits to leave, there was silence for a while. Things seemed calm. But then, one evening, the screen door flew open again. My dad, without missing a beat, just said, "Come in." After that, we noticed the strange events starting up again. It's like we've never truly been alone in that house, and whatever it is, it seems to be here, watching, waiting. I've had strange experiences for as long as I can remember, and my memory stretches back farther than most people would expect, especially for someone who was only 2 years old at the time. It was a typical morning in the small town of Brilliant, where my family lived in a duplex. My mother was busy trying to get my older sister, Amy, ready for school. I was playing in the shared bedroom my sister and I used to occupy. Amy was fixing her hair when she finished and left the room. Just as she walked out, the door slammed shut and locked behind her. I was still inside, completely alone and unable to reach the door handle to unlock it. I immediately began to scream and cry. My mother rushed up the stairs, her footsteps heavy as she came to help me. She assumed that Amy had locked the door as a prank, given her mischievous shriek. In a panic, my mother grabbed a screwdriver and tried to pry open the heavy wooden door, but the lock wouldn't budge. For what felt like an eternity, I continued to cry while my mother worked frantically to open the door. 10 minutes passed, and just as my mother was starting to grow desperate, something happened. The lock, without explanation, just flipped open. The door swung wide, and I was free. My mother was stunned, still kneeling with the screwdriver in hand. To this day, she insists that Amy must have locked me in, but I know it wasn't her. I can't explain why the door let me out, but it felt like something else was involved. That wasn't the end of it. From that point on, I started talking to things that no one else could see. I would converse with an unseen presence in our basement or another in my room. I can't recall exactly what I said, but one memory stands out. My mother was standing with me near the basement door, and I looked up at her and said, "Mommy, I don't want to help with the laundry because the man behind the steps will get me." The way I said it clearly terrified her. I also remember mornings when I would wake up from my crib and find the door gently lowered as if someone had let me out. My mother, puzzled by how I kept getting out, decided to watch me one morning. She tells me the story to this day, how I was asleep 1 minute, and then, without her seeing me, the crib door silently lowered. 5 minutes later, I was already out of bed and headed for breakfast. She knew I couldn't have done it myself. Something, had been letting me out. I don't know if I'm blessed or cursed, but I've seen things from a very young age, and I've learned to live with the images, even if they still haunt me. I've had strange experiences for as long as I can remember, and my memory stretches back farther than most people would expect, especially for someone who was only 2 years old at the time. It was a typical morning in the small town of Brilliant, where my family lived in a duplex. My mother was busy trying to get my older sister, Amy, ready for school. I was playing in the shared bedroom my sister and I used to occupy. Amy was fixing her hair when she finished and left the room. Just as she walked out, the door slammed shut and locked behind her. I was still inside, completely alone and unable to reach the door handle to unlock it. I immediately began to scream and cry. My mother rushed up the stairs, her footsteps heavy as she came to help me. She assumed that Amy had locked the door as a prank, given her mischievous shriek. In a panic, my mother grabbed a screwdriver and tried to pry open the heavy wooden door, but the lock wouldn't budge. Hey, sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the video, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content. For what felt like an eternity, I continued to cry while my mother worked frantically to open the door. 10 minutes passed, and just as my mother was starting to grow desperate, something happened. The lock, without explanation, just flipped open. The door swung wide, and I was free. My mother was stunned, still kneeling with the screwdriver in hand. To this day, she insists that Amy must have locked me in, but I know it wasn't her. I can't explain why the door let me out, but it felt like something else was involved. That wasn't the end of it. From that point on, I started talking to things that no one else could see. I would converse with an unseen presence in our basement or another in my room. I can't recall exactly what I said, but one memory stands out. My mother was standing with me near the basement door, and I looked up at her and said, "Mommy, I don't want to help with the laundry because the man behind the steps will get me." The way I said it clearly terrified her. I also remember mornings when I would wake up from my crib and find the door gently lowered as if someone had let me out. My mother, puzzled by how I kept getting out, decided to watch me one morning. She tells me the story to this day, how I was asleep 1 minute, and then, without her seeing me, the crib door silently lowered. 5 minutes later, I was already out of bed and headed for breakfast. She knew I couldn't have done it myself. Someone, something, had been letting me out. I don't know if I'm blessed or cursed, but I've seen things from a very young age, and I've learned to live with the images, even if they still haunt me. The second part of this story takes place when I was 5 years old, living with my family on Salt Run Road. We had a large trailer at the time, which for a mobile home was quite extravagant. One summer night, I was enjoying my bath in the master bathroom. The bath was something I looked forward to, especially because of the large spa tub. While most kids dreaded bath time, I saw it as an adventure. That night, my mother was in the kitchen, finishing up the dinner dishes, and I was alone in the bathroom, playing with bubbles and toys. To give you a sense of the layout, the bathroom had a large tub on one side and a standing shower behind the door. The shower was hidden from my view when I first entered, and the tub was far across the room. As I played, I glanced toward the shower and was immediately struck with a chilling sense of fear. The shower curtain started to move, pulled back by fingers that looked scorched, as if they had been burned. The fingers were dark and flaky, like the skin of a hot dog left too long on the grill. The long nails at the ends only made them more terrifying. As the curtain pulled back further, revealing what was behind it, I saw a figure, a woman. She had a strange glow around her, and I could feel my heart race. I screamed for my mother, my voice echoing through the house. It took a few moments for her to hear me, but when she finally ran to the bathroom, I pointed to the shower. "There's a witch in the shower," I told her, terrified. My mother, perhaps dismissing it as a child's imagination, told me to finish my bath and get out. But I couldn't stop pleading with her to check the shower. Eventually, my mother relented and looked behind the curtain. To both of our surprise, she found traces of ashes on the shower floor. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for the ashes to be there. My sister couldn't have done it because she would have been spotted. My mother stayed in the room while I finished my bath, her unease growing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. After that night, I dreaded bath time. The memory of the woman in the shower stayed with me, and I could never look at a closed shower curtain the same way again. To this day, whenever I enter a bathroom, I automatically pull the shower curtain open, just to be sure. It's about something strange and unsettling that happened to me and my cousins one summer. My aunt lived in a rural part of Guilford, surrounded by nothing but fields and woods. Right next to her house, there was an old cemetery, and not too far away, about half a mile, was a creepy old house. To this day, my brother, cousins, and I are convinced that house is haunted. The house was built from reddish brick, with dark, pointed fences on the roof, those kind that look like something out of a horror movie. The windows were always closed, and there were never any lights on, never any sign of life. It was as if the place had been abandoned for decades. We used to talk about it all the time. The old house stood there, silent and mysterious, and we couldn't resist the temptation to explore. One day, my brother, cousins, and I decided to check it out. We figured we'd just walk around the yard for a few minutes and then leave. But when we got there, we noticed something we hadn't seen before, an old barn next to the house and a large field. There was an outhouse too, and a cellar door that led down into the darkness below. We couldn't help ourselves. We had to go inside. We approached the shed first. Its door was swaying in the wind, creaking softly. My brother went in first, and despite feeling uneasy, we followed. Inside, there was another door. It didn't lead to a normal room. It led right into the house. At first, the door wouldn't budge, but then my cousin noticed that it was cracked open just a little. We pushed on it, and it creaked open wide. The moment it did, something about the place felt off, like we had crossed a line. We all screamed in shock and bolted out of there. But after catching our breath, we realized that we would wonder forever what would have happened if we hadn't gone inside, so we decided to go back. We were terrified, but curiosity was winning. The moment we stepped inside, the air felt different. The first room looked like an old kitchen. There was a stove, one of those heavy, black ones that sit on the ground, with a pipe going up through the ceiling. That was my first clue that this house might be a century old. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and I couldn't help but voice my fear. What if the floor gives way and we fall into the cellar? My cousin looked like he was about to cry, but we managed to calm him down. We kept moving cautiously through the house. The rooms were small, cramped, and dusty. There was no way we were going to go near the cellar door, which stood ominously in the corner. As we made our way through the house, we noticed that the front door was locked and bolted shut with boards. All the windows were nailed down tight. We were starting to feel like this place was more than just abandoned. It felt like something was keeping it locked up. Just as we were about to leave, my brother spotted something that made our blood run cold. A staircase. It was old and winding, leading up into the dark unknown. We debated for a moment, and my brother, ever the brave one, decided he would take a few steps up to see if he could spot anything. We let him go, though none of us were thrilled about the idea of him going up alone. He made it about 5 steps up before we heard it. A terrible crashing sound from downstairs, coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen or been knocked over. We all screamed and bolted out of the house. We didn't even bother to shut the door behind us, which, looking back, was probably our first mistake. We didn't care. We just ran. We ran back to my aunt's house as quickly as we could, passing by the cemetery on our way. As we looked over, we saw something strange. A group of men working in the cemetery. At first, I thought they were just tending to the grounds, but when I looked closer, I saw that they were digging. It looked like they were digging a grave. I was instantly unsettled. I had always thought the cemetery was too old to be used for new burials, but now, seeing them work there in the dead of night, I wondered what was going on. When we told my aunt about it, she was visibly shocked. She explained that there had been a fire in the cemetery the night before, though she didn't know the details. It was too much of a coincidence. Everything had happened the day after we went to the house. And now there were no trespassing signs all over the yard. Someone had definitely seen us. The strangest part of all this came the next day. My mom took my brother and me back to my aunt's house to visit before we left. As we drove past the cemetery, I saw the workers again, but this time they were gone. The eerie feeling lingered. We never went back to the house, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. If my brother had gone up those stairs, what would have happened? What was it that fell in the kitchen? We may never know, but one thing is certain. We owe our lives to whatever it was that fell and scared us out of that house. And as for the grave digging, well, we'll never forget the eerie coincidence that everything happened the day after we dared to explore the haunted house. Could the house have been waiting for us? Or was it something else entirely? When I was 14, I had a friend who had more supernatural experiences than anyone I knew. She'd often tell me about the strange things she'd seen, both at her dad's house and her mom's house, and even before she had moved to those places. When she was just 3 years old, she would often see her dead grandfather near the swing set in the backyard. One day, when her mom asked what she was doing, she replied casually, "I was playing with Grandpa." Needless to say, her mom was concerned and told her to come inside. After that, there weren't any strange occurrences for a while. But then, things started to happen when she moved into her mom's house, which was an old Civil War hospital. This house was like something out of a horror movie. There were always strange happenings. My friend told me that she would sometimes see her dead cats roaming around, and occasionally dead people would appear. I was skeptical, but when she shared more stories, I couldn't deny that something was definitely wrong with that house. One of the creepiest things she told me about was the knocking. Every night, at exactly midnight, something would bang in the middle of her door. It would knock once, then go silent. She didn't investigate it, but I was determined to help. I was a bit scared to spend the night, but I agreed to visit her room during the day to see what was going on. When I got to her house, I immediately felt it. It was like there was something in the air, an energy that I couldn't explain. I had never seen a ghost, nor had I ever felt a presence like this before, but now I was sure. Something was definitely in her house. I told my friend I would help figure out what was causing the knocking, so I suggested she talk to it. I told her to ask, "Hey, is there anyone there?" Surprisingly, after she spoke those words, the knocking stopped, but that wasn't the end of it. From that point on, a little ghost girl would show up every now and then. She looked to be about 7 years old, and she appeared in the house when my friend was doing her homework. I never saw her myself. Honestly, I was too scared to spend the night at her place when these appearances started happening. But my friend and her brother both saw the ghost. I trusted them, especially since her brother wasn't the kind of person to make things up. The ghost girl, who we later named Cecilia, would often be seen near the staircase at night. My friend and I figured it would be good to give her a name, so I picked Cecilia because the ghost seemed silly, and the name had a little whimsy to it. But when my friend asked the ghost one night if her name was Cecilia, the ghost replied, "No, that's my mom's name. My name is Annie." From then on, my friend would talk to Annie, asking her all sorts of things, though I can't remember everything they talked about. One of the things they discussed was friendship. My friend asked Annie if she wanted to be her friend, and Annie said yes. Over the next few weeks, the two became somewhat close until one day, Annie told my friend she had to go. She thanked my friend for being her friend, and after that, the visits from the little ghost stopped. Strangely, during the time Annie was visiting my friend, I started feeling a presence in my own basement room at night. I never saw anything, but I always felt like someone, or something, was there. When Annie left my friend's house, the feeling disappeared from my own house. I can't help but wonder if Annie had something to do with it. Could she have followed me? Or maybe the presence at my house just went away once Annie's unfinished business was resolved. But even after Annie left, my friend's experiences didn't stop. At her dad's house, which was near the West Virginia border, she started seeing even more unsettling things. She told me about the time she was near a creek by his house. She was alone when she suddenly felt something push her into the water. When she looked up, she saw an Indian man across the creek staring at her. Terrified, she ran, and over time, she saw at least 3 other Indian ghosts near her dad's house. She never really understood why these spirits appeared, but I always wondered if it had something to do with the fact that she was 16% Native American. Throughout all of this, my friend had countless encounters with spirits, white blobs, more ghost sightings, and eerie feelings in the air. I never saw them myself, but hearing her stories made me believe her completely. The ghost of Annie, in particular, was the most poignant. Annie probably just needed a friend before she could move on, and that's exactly what she got. My friend gave her that, and in return, Annie left her in peace. Even now, thinking back on those stories, I still feel the chills. My friend experienced so many supernatural events that I can't help but wonder if there was something bigger at play. Maybe Annie wasn't the only spirit trying to make contact. Whatever it was, I'll never forget the strange, eerie presence that lingered in my friend's life and in mine. Last year, my friends and I went to visit a small farmhouse near a town called Perot. The house belonged to my grandfather's friend, and it was a new property, with nothing particularly eerie about it. The first day there, we helped the old man on his farm, just trying to make ourselves useful. At lunch, he started telling us an old story about wars between the Europeans and the native Maori tribes that had taken place on the very land where his house stood. The story sounded a bit dull, but what caught our attention was when he mentioned that many people had died right on the land. Then the old man told us something that really piqued our curiosity. He said that every night he would see a little kid running around his crops, causing trouble by vandalizing them with a stick. The strange part was that the kid didn't seem to be afraid of anything, not even the 3 full-grown farm dogs barking at him. The old man assumed the kid had some sort of mental disorder, but he got fed up with the child's behavior, especially one night when the kid was standing just a few meters from the gate, too close to one of the dogs that was tied up with a chain. The old man observed the child through the window for a long time. The kid was staring directly into the dog's eyes while it barked wildly, but the child didn't react at all, not even a blink. Finally, the old man decided to step outside and chase him away. But when he got to the door and looked at the gate, The kid had vanished, though the dog was still barking its lungs out. The old man was shocked and confused. The next day, we decided to walk around the farm, just to see if we could find anything unusual. That night, around 8:30 p.m., my friend and I were sitting on the front porch while the other two were asleep on the couches inside, and the old man was drinking whiskey at the dining table. We were bored and messing around on our laptops when suddenly I heard footsteps on the roof. The sound of tin sheets bending under weight echoed through the night. We froze, both of us getting a sinking feeling in our stomachs. Everyone else was inside, and we were alone out here. I stood up, intending to check it out, but just as I was about to step off the porch, there was a loud thud, like something heavy had fallen to the ground, followed by the sound of bones cracking. My friend and I immediately turned around, our hearts pounding, and there, lying on the ground, was the same little kid we had been told about. He looked like a normal child, though it was hard to see clearly in the dark. He was wearing dark dungarees and a white shirt. At first, we completely forgot the story the old man had told us and rushed to see if the kid was okay. But my friend pulled on my arm, looking uneasy. I told him to stop overreacting, but when I turned back to look at the kid, I froze. In the blink of an eye, the kid was standing up as if nothing had happened. Half of his face was covered in blood, but he didn't seem to be in any pain. We didn't even hesitate. We ran back up onto the porch in sheer terror. We didn't stop there. We quickly went inside the house, but we dared not look outside. Through the window, we could see the little kid standing in the yard, his face expressionless. And then, in the blink of an eye, he ran across the backyard with terrifying speed, so fast that it was almost like he vanished. Neither of us could speak for a while. We were both shaken up, and we drank as much water as we could to calm down, though it didn't help. We spent the rest of the night sitting on one of the couches, turning on the TV in an attempt to distract ourselves, but the image of the bloody-faced child wouldn't leave our minds. Around 3 a.m., the old man woke up, still groggy from his whiskey. He walked over to us and with a slight chuckle asked, "So, found anything yet?" I managed a faint laugh, but I could see he was still half asleep. My friend and I told him what we saw, describing the kid in detail. The old man looked both concerned and shocked. After a long pause, he told us kindly that it would be best if we left the next morning. We didn't argue, and we packed up quietly. We didn't bother telling the other two guys who had been asleep during the whole incident. They wouldn't have believed us anyway. It took us a couple of days to shake off the panic, but I think the image of that kid and the terrifying speed with which he ran away would stay with us for a long time. The experience definitely left us questioning what had really happened that night at the old farmhouse. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When my family and I moved to a house in Waco, Kentucky, it was meant to be a fresh start. My sister, my nieces, and I settled in, and we weren't far from my niece's home. One night I was on the computer while my sister and the girls were in our shared room. My bed was on one side of the room, built onto an extension, while they were sitting on the other side, on my sister's bed. Out of nowhere, I heard my name being called, clear and urgent. I opened the door, and the girls were all pointing at my bed. I walked over and froze. The front of the bed was sinking down, as though someone had been sitting there. The girls insisted they saw a young Indian girl holding a doll. Waco, after all, had been Native American land long before it was settled. I didn't want to believe it, but the bed didn't look like the pillow was the problem. The entire side of the bed was sunken, not just a hole in the middle. My mother later explained it away as a pillow issue, but we all felt something was off. This wasn't the only strange thing that happened in the house. My uncle had passed away in the room I shared with my sister, a heart attack that took him suddenly. My sister often said that when she was lying down, she would look at the small fan by her bed, and sometimes she would see a figure, as if someone were looking down at her. One night she said she felt an overwhelming urge to say his name out loud. When she did, the figure leaned forward, stretching out a hand as if trying to touch her. Another experience I had was in my mother's room. There was this awful feeling of darkness whenever the lights were off, a heaviness that felt almost like it was watching you. One night, I had moved my bed next to my sister's, and from where I lay, I could see into the living room. The hallway between my mother's room and the kitchen was narrow, and in that space, I saw something strange. There was a girl standing in the hallway, hunched over, as if crying. It was the kind of vision you can't quite shake off. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but soon, other things started happening, and it felt like the whole house was being observed by some unseen presence. I remember one night when my sister was asleep on the couch. She was facing the wall when she suddenly felt a strange, cold breath near her ear and neck. She turned around to find a little black dog standing by her. It didn't bark, but she said it looked like it was trying to. The dog quickly ran into the kitchen and disappeared. The next morning, my sister drew what it looked like, the way it had sat by her, still as if it were watching. There were nights when she would listen to her CD player as she drifted off to sleep. One evening, as she was about to fall asleep, she set her headphones beside her. Later, she heard the distinct sound of the headphones being moved, the noise of them being pulled up and down, like someone was playing with them. But there was no one there. After a few years in the house, things started to escalate. One night, my granny was asleep in my room, my sister on the couch, and I was in my bed. I woke up several times during the night, each time finding the door to my room opened a little more than it had been before. After waking up the seventh time, the door was wide open. It was as though someone was coming in, or perhaps something was trying to get out. Another night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and when I opened the door, it felt as if someone was behind it. As I pulled the door open, it seemed to pull back against me, almost as if someone was pushing from the other side. My niece also had a similar experience with the door, feeling like someone was behind it, pulling her toward it. One evening, I decided to set up a recorder at the end of my bed, right where I had seen the girl sitting earlier. When I checked the recorder later, it had mysteriously turned off, without anyone touching it. There was no explanation for why it had stopped. In my mother's room, there were always dolls placed above her bed. One night, my niece and I were lying there, watching TV, when one of the dolls, a cowboy, fell. The strange part was, the doll's face seemed to be staring right at us. It was unsettling, and neither of us dared to touch it. It's still there, in the same spot, untouched by anyone. One afternoon, my sister and two nieces were in my mother's room when something strange happened. My older niece stopped suddenly, arms crossed tightly over her chest, but her hands weren't holding them in place. My sister tried to pull her arms apart, but they wouldn't move, as though something was holding them, preventing her from moving. It was as if something unseen was controlling her, holding her still. Over the years, we've all seen things, figures in the shadows, faces that vanish when you blink, and strange sounds in the house at night. It was as though the house had a presence of its own, something that never quite let us feel at ease. And yet, here I am, still living in this house today, where the memories of those strange experiences linger, like echoes of something that hasn't left. My mother passed away almost 4 years ago, and as her anniversary approaches on August 14th, I often find myself reflecting on those last weeks with her. She was heavily medicated, struggling with the severe pain from her cancer, and during that time, she said and did things that could easily be attributed to the effects of the medication. But there are a few moments that stand out, ones that have always felt significant. My mother's anger was palpable in those final days. She had been taken from us so quickly, and she never really had the chance to process it. She never had the time to come to terms with the fact that it was her time to go. I had planned a trip to visit my boyfriend in Ontario, and as much as I desperately wanted to be with my mother, she insisted I go. "You deserve it," she told me. So, reluctantly, I went. Even though I had panic attacks the whole time, I did find some solace, but my heart was heavy. I spoke with her every night during my trip, and I made sure to tell my friends not to call my cell phone unless there was an emergency. My parents weren't even supposed to call unless something urgent happened. The only time my phone was supposed to ring was if I needed to be on a plane back home immediately. When I returned, my mother had become painfully thin. Her skin had taken on a yellowish tint, but there was something different in her demeanor. She seemed at peace, even though her health was rapidly declining. I couldn't sleep without hearing the sound of her respirator, and if I couldn't hear it, I would wake up in a panic. So I slept on the uncomfortable couch in the upstairs living room, just so I could hear it. As her death drew nearer, the medication she was on seemed to dull her awareness, but there were moments when she would smile in a way that almost seemed childlike. One afternoon, I was lying beside her in her room when she suddenly seemed to shift her focus. She had been blissfully staring at the television, lost in its images, with a small smile on her face. But then, out of nowhere, her gaze shifted to the corner of the room. She gasped softly, and with wide eyes whispered, "Who's that?" She was still staring at the corner as I began to ask her questions. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked gently. She nodded, never breaking her gaze. "Mom, are you seeing things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded again, glanced at me, then returned her focus to the corner. "It's a person," she whispered. "Do you know them?" I asked, my heart racing. She cocked her head slightly and said, "I think so." I squeezed her hand and reassured her. "It's okay, Mom. It's probably someone you know, just stopping by to visit. They're letting you know everything's going to be okay." She smiled, and for the next 20 minutes, she just kept staring at the figure, a soft, peaceful smile on her lips. Eventually, she sighed and returned her focus to the television. When I told my father about what had happened, he dismissed it as the medication. He seemed a little unsettled, though, and when I asked him why, he just said he had things on his mind. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened. The morning she passed away, I was lying at the foot of my parents' bed. My father was beside her, fully clothed, and I was sprawled across the end of the bed, half on the bench they had set up for their dog. We had all fallen asleep listening to the rain the night before, and it was early, maybe around 6:05, when something strange happened. I felt my mother's hand touch the top of my head. It was unmistakable. She had a very distinct way of touching me, a way that no one else could. Her touch always woke me up, even when the house alarm couldn't. I was startled, though, because I knew she wasn't standing in front of me. I looked around, and sure enough, she was still lying on her side of the bed, gazing directly at me. There was no way she could have gotten up to touch me, but I knew that she had, or that someone had. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at her and whispered, "Mom, is it time?" She nodded slowly, and I quickly woke my father. I ran to get the nurse and my brother, and before long, I was back by her side. I lay beside her as she began to let go. Her lungs filled with fluid, and she gripped onto me tightly. I took her hair comb and began brushing her hair, as she always loved. It was a small comfort for both of us. My mother died in my arms that morning, and the moment she passed, I felt this intense, overwhelming sensation. It felt as though she had passed through me, as though her spirit was now part of me. It's something I will never forget. Minutes later, as my father and I stood outside on the deck, the sky above us was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The sky was pink, swirling with hues I couldn't quite describe. It felt otherworldly. My father saw it too, and so did the neighbors. Later, we learned that the entire East Coast had lost power that same day, and I couldn't help but find the timing oddly fitting. My mother had always said she was going to go out with a bang. In the weeks that followed, I wasn't myself. My friends could tell, and even some family members remarked that they felt my mother's presence inside of me. I said things that weren't like me, things I don't remember saying. One phrase, in particular, shocked me when it slipped out, "Mo, I don't want them to see my body." Mo, of course, was my father, and them were my mother's sisters. I ran downstairs, overwhelmed by the feeling that something was off. I don't know where those words came from, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother was still with me in those moments. At the funeral, I recounted the story of my mother seeing a figure in the corner of her room, and that's when my father shared something that left me speechless. It turned out that on the very same day, at almost the exact same time, my mother had seen the figure. Her uncle, my great-uncle, had passed away in his sleep. Perhaps it had been him visiting, letting her know that everything was going to be okay after all. I grew up in the suburbs of Columbia, South Carolina, during the 70s and 80s. It was a peaceful, quiet neighborhood in Irmo, with tree-lined streets and friendly faces. Our house was a large colonial-style home on pondfront property. My family was only the second set of owners, and as far as I know, nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened before us. Nothing that would suggest the house was haunted, at least not in any obvious way. But even in the calm of suburban life, there were moments, small, inexplicable things, that stuck with me. My earliest memories of something feeling off happened in the upstairs bathroom that my siblings and I used. It was a large space with 2 sinks and a big toilet area, but there was a feeling there that I couldn't shake. More than once, I would be in the shower, soap in my hair, and suddenly feel like I was being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, one I couldn't explain. I never saw anything, but I could sense a presence, like someone was standing just beyond my sight. I assumed at first that it was just my imagination or maybe my siblings playing tricks on me. After all, things would sometimes go missing, or my clothes would end up in a different place than I had left them. I thought it was all harmless, but there was one day that proved me wrong. It was summer, and my family had gone to a local swim meet. My older brother and younger sister were swimming, but I wasn't interested in joining them. Fishing was more my speed back then, so I spent the afternoon by myself, lost in the quiet of the outdoors. When I came home, the house was empty, and I was covered in mud from head to toe, something I hadn't expected, but I'd certainly earned it. I kicked off my muddy shoes in the mud room, a small area by the stairs where we always left our dirty shoes so as not to track it through the house. Then I headed upstairs to take a shower. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everything seemed normal, until I walked into the bathroom. I took off my shorts and laid them on the chair beneath the small window that overlooked the backyard. Then I started the shower and stepped in, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had crept up on me. The warm water felt good, and the smell of Prel shampoo was comforting, as it always was. I scrubbed the mud off, rinsed, and washed again, knowing how stubborn the dirt could be. When I finished, I turned off the water and pulled back the shower curtain, expecting to see the same familiar sight. But to my shock, my clothes had been moved. My shirt, which had been neatly folded on the chair, was now on the floor, clearly displaced. I grabbed a towel and stepped out, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The bathroom door was wide open, and there, on the tile floor, was a small trail of mud leading out into the hallway. Now this wasn't a tiny bathroom. It had 2 sinks and a large toilet area, so it didn't make sense that the mud trail would be there at all. I dried off quickly, heart racing, and cautiously stepped into the hallway. Looking to my left, everything appeared normal, but when I looked to my right, the sight was enough to freeze me in place. A muddy trail ran down the wall, from the top of the stairs all the way to the bottom. My shorts, still covered in dirt, were at the foot of the stairs. It was as if someone had taken my shorts, held them at arm's length, and walked them down the wall, leaving a trail of mud behind them. I stood there for a moment, unable to process what I was seeing. It wasn't just strange, it was downright eerie. I knew my parents would be home soon, and there was no way I could explain what had happened. My mother would absolutely flip if she saw the mess I was about to have to clean up, and the trail on the wallpaper. I tried my best to scrub the streaks away, but it was impossible. No matter how hard I tried, the mud marks wouldn't come out. When I finally managed to get the wall somewhat cleaned up, I had no idea what to say. I had no explanation, and when I tried to tell my parents what had happened, I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They didn't know what to make of it either, but it certainly wasn't something I could forget. That was just one of many strange things that happened in that house. It was a typical summer night around 9 p.m., and my friends and I were feeling bored, with nothing to do. Julie, always the adventurous one, came up with the idea of visiting the old cemetery near the highway. Everyone was game, hoping for a little thrill and maybe a scare, so we drove to the nearby 7-Eleven to park, since there wasn't any parking right by the cemetery. We walked a couple of blocks in the dark, the streets unusually quiet. The air felt unseasonably cold for a summer evening, and there was no wind at all. A shiver ran down my spine, and I found myself clutching Julie's hand as we approached the cemetery gates. It was much spookier than I remembered, and the stillness of the night only seemed to heighten the tension. As we ventured deeper into the cemetery, the cold air seemed to press in around us. We walked under the first streetlight, and as we passed it, it flickered and then shut off. No one had walked underneath it before, and I could feel my heart race. We all froze, wondering if it was some trick or a malfunction. But when it didn't flicker back on, panic set in. Without saying a word, we all ran to the far side of the cemetery, closer to the street. We paused, trying to calm down. Maybe it was just a coincidence, we thought. But then, as we moved further in, we passed under another light. Click. It went off again, plunging us into darkness. We were now sure it wasn't a malfunction. A chill ran through us, and we dashed back to the entrance, feeling a strange sensation that we were being watched. Once we stepped outside the cemetery's gates, the air seemed to warm up again. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. As we stood outside the 7-Eleven, the guys decided they wanted to go back in and play cemetery tag, but Julie and I were having none of it. We flat out refused. Julie called Jerry to let him know the time was getting late, and we needed to head home soon. As we talked, the guys took off to play their game, but when they came back to the 7-Eleven, one of them was missing. Jason. Jerry, worried, went back into the cemetery to look for him. A few minutes later, he came back with Jason in tow, and everyone who had to go home was driven back. But Jason, Jerry, and I still had unfinished business. The guys decided we should go back into the cemetery one more time, and this time, I wasn't going to chicken out. I just needed a flashlight for some sense of security. I called it a night, and Jason drove me home to grab some flashlights and extra batteries. The idea of returning to the cemetery felt surreal, but there was a part of me that couldn't back down now. When we returned, the cemetery felt even more eerie than before. As we walked through the rows of gravestones, the lights kept turning off, click, whenever we walked under them. It was like the whole place was playing tricks on us, and with the air still so unnervingly cold, it felt like something was lurking just beyond our sight. We moved toward the far side of the cemetery when all of a sudden, a bright flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Startled, we froze. A cop stood before us, her flashlight trained on us like a spotlight. She asked what we were doing, and before we could answer, another officer appeared outside the gates, this time a guy. We were all given citations, and with heavy hearts, Jason drove us back to 7-Eleven. Jerry and I waited for my dad to pick us up. It was a strange and unsettling end to our night, and none of us ever returned to that cemetery at night again. The funniest part? I couldn't get grounded. After all, my dad had given me the flashlights in the first place. As for my friends, they were off the hook too. But that night, we all learned that sometimes the things that seem harmless, like playing around in a cemetery, might be more than we bargained for. My brother got a motorbike for his 18th birthday. He had been riding it for only a week when he collided with a lorry and was rushed to the hospital. Sadly, he passed away a couple of days later. Years later, I was with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, on our way to her mom's house for tea. We had to wait because they were running late. Out of nowhere, the car suddenly went freezing cold, and I could see my breath. I looked up, and to my shock, I saw a motorbike hovering in the air, coming straight toward us. We were both terrified, thinking it was about to hit us. But just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. It was my brother's birthday that day. When I bought my first house with my wife, it had a basement with an old-fashioned fireplace, which we used as a living room. One evening, My wife was making sandwiches while I went to the toilet. While using the bathroom, I saw a figure in the bathtub, but I could only make out half of it. I quickly turned my head toward the bath, only to realize it was just my shirt drying. I went downstairs and my wife asked me who I was talking to in the bathroom. I told her no one, but she insisted she heard me speaking in a harsh voice, almost demonic in tone. Later that evening, as I was reading the newspaper, my wife suddenly screamed. I rushed to the kitchen and asked her what was wrong. She told me it felt like someone had dragged a sharp knife down her back, but there were no marks. A few years later, we moved to a new house. We had a serious slug problem, especially in summer when they slithered under the door into the kitchen. One night, I woke up to an incredibly loud heartbeat-like noise. In a trance-like state, I went downstairs without turning on the lights. The closer I got to the kitchen, the louder the noise became. When I reached the kitchen and switched on the lights, the noise stopped, but I noticed a huge brown slug in the middle of the kitchen, far too large to have slipped under the door. I threw it in the bin and went back to bed. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the video, please let me know in the comments from where you are watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The next day, I spoke with my neighbor. She told me that her daughter, who was staying over, suddenly started screaming the night before, and the lights in their house had been flickering on and off at the exact same time as my experience. I'm Tiffany from Rhode Island, and I'm 17 years old. I wanted to share a few experiences I've had that still give me chills. A few months ago, my aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, and I went to spend a few days at my grandmother's house in New Hampshire. It's a small, cozy place, perfect for relaxing. One evening, my aunt, uncle, and my little cousin Tyler, who was about 5 at the time, went outside to roast marshmallows. It was around 9 or 10 at night. I was hanging out in my grandmother's bedroom with my younger cousin Taylor, who's about 3 years younger than me. We had the laptop out on a little tray, sitting on the edge of the bed. After a while, Taylor decided to join the others outside, leaving me alone in the room. It wasn't long before I felt something odd. I was sitting there, still focused on the laptop, when I felt someone sit down on the bed next to me. I froze. No one had entered the room. The door was closed, and I would have heard it. I got up quickly, feeling a strange unease in the pit of my stomach, and walked outside to join the others, still trying to shake off that creepy feeling. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen at my grandmother's house. A few months before that, it was just me, my cousin Taylor, and my aunt who went up to New Hampshire. Once again, Taylor and I were hanging out in the bedroom when suddenly, I was hit with an intense headache. It was so bad, I thought I might throw up. I decided to leave the room in search of some Tylenol, and the moment I stepped out, the headache vanished. No nausea, no pain. I was fine. So I went back in. But as soon as I stepped back into the room, the headache came rushing back. I couldn't explain it. I left again, and it went away. I found it strange enough that I mentioned it to one of my friends later, and she said something that made me pause. Maybe something happened in that room. I've started to think that maybe my grandmother's house is haunted. Here's why. A woman named Ida lived next door and passed away just a few months after moving in. I don't know if that means anything, but it feels like it could be connected somehow. One night, my uncle and his girlfriend were staying over. They were sleeping on an air mattress in the living room when my uncle suddenly felt like someone was standing right next to him. He turned to look, but no one was there. In the morning, he told his girlfriend about it, and she said, "You felt that too." I was too scared to turn around and check. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened in that house. One time, my cousin and I were sleeping in the sun porch when we heard footsteps outside, moving back and forth, back and forth. We both froze. My aunt, hearing us, said it was probably just a dog, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew. It sounded like a person. We got so freaked out that we decided to move into the living room. But even there, after we settled down and tried to sleep, we started hearing the footsteps again, right outside the front door, near the windows where we were lying. I remember holding my breath, listening, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. My husband and I moved to Texas for the military, and about 6 months after arriving, we moved onto the base. It wasn't long before strange things started happening in our new home. One night, my husband finally opened up to me. He told me that he's been seeing things since he was 8 years old. At first, I was intrigued. Growing up, I always believed in the paranormal, and I thought it was an interesting subject to explore. When he was a child, they had moved to Ohio, and one night while he was in his room, he left the door cracked open. Suddenly, it swung wide, stopping just short of hitting the wall. Standing in the doorway was a tall, dark shadow figure. After that night, the figure followed him everywhere. No matter where he went, it was always there. When they first moved into that house, they discovered dead animals hanging in the attic. They took them down, but each day there were more. This went on for about 3 weeks, and then it stopped, leaving a strange feeling of unease hanging in the air. Another incident at that house involved my husband's mother. She was a few months pregnant when she felt a strong force push her down the stairs. Tragically, she miscarried the baby soon after. They eventually moved out of that house and settled in Iowa. From what I know, she didn't experience anything else there, but my husband, Patrick, continued seeing strange figures around the farm outside. He ignored them, brushing it off as just his imagination, until we moved to Texas. That's when things started to escalate. One night, Patrick left for training for a few weeks, and I had to sleep with the light on. There was this overwhelming feeling of discomfort, like I wasn't alone. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard something whisper in my ear. It said, "Get out." My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up, looking around the room. No one was there. My dog, who was lying beside the bed, didn't even move. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't sleep. As I drifted into REM sleep, I felt what seemed like cold fingers brush my neck. I jumped up, terrified, and yelled, "Leave me alone." I quickly went back to sleep, but the rest of the night was quiet. The next day, my twin brother arrived to stay with us, and after that, the strange occurrences seemed to stop. At least they left me alone. Another time, I was in the bathroom doing my hair when I heard the toilet flush by itself. I walked through the house to check on things, and when I reached the kitchen, I saw that all the cabinets were open. It was the kind of thing that made your skin crawl, but didn't quite feel dangerous, just unsettling. Then there was the night we were sitting in the living room watching a movie. It was around Christmas time in 2005. Patrick had finished his drink and set his cup on the side table next to the couch. When the movie was almost over, something hit the cup. It flew up into the air, twirled, and landed on the floor, upside down. We all stared at each other, confused. But after a few moments, we just shrugged it off and continued with the movie. By the time the credits rolled, the cup was sitting there, upside down, as if it had never moved. My friend, who was with us, was visibly shaken, but Patrick and I were used to things like this by then. She was always a little scared to come over, but she did anyway, even though she saw shadows moving on the walls. One night, my friend and I were sitting together, having a drink, when my husband called out to me in a terrified voice. I rushed into the room, and he told me that something had been pulling on his leg. Then he said a huge, green, gargoyle-like face had appeared from the corner of the room and shot straight at him. It terrified him, and I could see why. I was a little shaken too, but after a while, I just brushed it off, like I had with all the other strange things. It wasn't until my brother moved in with us that things seemed to settle down. The house felt less oppressive, less active, and then we moved again. I have a friend named Lisa. She's either 13 or 14, I think. My sister Sarah knows her better than I do, but I got the chance to spend the night at her house once, and let me tell you, it was an experience I'll never forget. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that my experiences were ghostly, but Lisa's definitely were. I'm here to tell you about what happened that night. Lisa's house is pretty unusual. It's shaped like a plane. No joke. Her room is down one long, narrow point, and the front door. The doorknob is right in the center. So we always entered through the side door, which leads into a tiny room next to the driveway. This little room is connected to the kitchen, and it's always a little odd walking through it because there's a sliding door that leads to it from the kitchen. It's almost like this small room is part of the kitchen itself. Inside this room, there's a washing machine and a pantry stocked with food. Then you enter the kitchen, which is a decent size with a TV. That's where we spent most of the night. It was me, Lisa, my sister Sarah, and a couple of other girls, Alexia and Erica, hanging out. We were sitting in the kitchen, messing around on Alexia's laptop, checking MySpace and prank calling some people we didn't like. But then, something strange happened. The motion sensor light outside suddenly turned on, and the dog started barking furiously. We thought maybe it was just a car driving by or something, but it was unsettling. So we closed the blinds and huddled against the cabinets, hoping no one could see us. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Maybe it was just a possum or something. Eventually, we all went to bed, and that's when things got weird. I don't remember the exact details, but I heard a strange sound in the hallway, a kind of scratching or shuffling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I ignored it and fell asleep. The next morning, I told Lisa about the noise. She seemed unfazed, but then she casually mentioned that it was probably the ghost. I was shocked. I had no idea what she was talking about, but once she started telling me about the strange things that had happened in her house, I began to realize that maybe I had just experienced a small part of something bigger. Lisa explained that she and her little sister, Susan, had been haunted in this house for as long as they could remember. Susan would often ask someone to walk with her through the house, even for something as simple as going to the kitchen. Lisa said she used to scare Susan by sneaking up behind her and making a loud hissing sound, like a cat. But one night, while lying in bed, Lisa heard a loud, real cat hiss, as if it was right next to her. She was so terrified, she nearly wet herself. After that night, she stopped trying to scare Susan like that, and she never heard the cat again. But it didn't stop there. Lisa's parents' bedroom, it seemed, was the center of everything. She told me that at night, she would see strange things in the mirrors, and sometimes even ghosts in the bathroom. That's when I started to realize that this wasn't just a few weird noises. One night, something happened with Susan that Lisa couldn't explain. It was around 11 p.m., and Susan came into Lisa's room excited. She'd been playing her PSP and told Lisa she'd gotten to a really high level. But Lisa, already half asleep, told her to go to bed and close the door behind her. However, when Susan walked away, she didn't close the door. Lisa called out to her, but eventually got up and shut it herself. The next morning, when Lisa asked Susan why she didn't close the door, Susan gave her a blank stare and said, "Lisa, you never told me to close it." Lisa was confused, but Susan was adamant. She said, "But I was fast asleep. I never came in your room." That was enough to make Lisa feel like she was losing her mind. But the stories didn't end there. Susan had her own creepy experience. One evening, she was watching TV in the living room, and a commercial came on. As she waited, she stared at a little dried fish on top of the TV. She noticed something odd. The fish seemed to be staring at her. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but when she looked away and then looked back, the fish's eyes had moved. She freaked out and told Lisa about it, but Lisa didn't believe her at first. It wasn't until later, after hearing more strange stories from Susan, that Lisa began to realize just how much the house seemed to play tricks on their minds. And the more I heard about it, the more I wondered if maybe this house really was haunted. Was it all just a series of strange coincidences? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 15 or 16 years old, my father and I were part of a group for divorced parents that often did activities together on the weekends, everything from softball to bowling. But what we looked forward to the most was the camping trips. One weekend, we were scheduled to visit the Three Links campground in Winnemucca, California, a place that was known for its natural beauty and rich history of the Miwok Native Americans who had lived there long before. It was a Friday morning when we arrived, set up our tents, and cooked lunch. We spent the rest of the day apart, exploring the area, knowing we would all reunite that evening around the campfire with the rest of the campers. I had met up with a couple of other kids my age and decided to hike south to a part of the campground that I had never seen before. It was a strange area, completely flat, with no foliage or vegetation, almost as if nature had just left it barren. For a moment, it felt a little off, but then we shrugged it off and began playing football, unaware that this would be the last moment of normalcy for the weekend. As dusk approached, dark clouds began rolling in. Before we knew it, the rain started to pour. We rushed back to camp, trying to salvage our food and keep the water out of our tents. An outgoing member of our group, an adult, spoke with the camp director, who allowed us to spend the rest of the night in the group meeting facility located on the campground grounds. It was a large wooden building, and we all eagerly accepted the offer to sleep there, glad to escape the cold and rain. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying the video, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing where everyone's watching from. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more exciting content coming your way. Your support means a lot. We didn't get comfortable for long. It was only a couple of hours after settling into the meeting hall when one of the women in the group began whispering about a feeling she was getting. She couldn't explain it, but she said there was a presence in the room, a benevolent one. I was skeptical. I'd always been the type to dismiss such things, even at 15. But then, she stood up, walked to the front door of the meeting room, and opened it. We all followed her, intrigued by the odd energy she seemed to be sensing. We stood on the wraparound deck, looking out into the rain-soaked night. The woman started describing a figure moving towards us, slowly down the dirt path below. At first, I saw nothing. The rain was coming down hard, and the floodlights from across the campground barely illuminated anything. But then, I saw it. A silhouette. It was the faint outline of a tall man, walking towards us, his figure just slightly distorted by the rain. I couldn't make out any defining features, no face or details, just a dark shape moving through the downpour. The figure stopped, just shy of the stoop of the deck. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a minute or so before it simply faded from sight, as if it had never been there. We all stood in silence watching, but no one said a word. After it disappeared, we retreated back into the warmth of the building, and everyone settled down to sleep in an uneasy silence. No one talked about it that night. We all just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if what we had just seen was real, or if we had all imagined it. It wasn't until a few camping trips later that the conversation came up again. The woman who had first felt the presence shared that she had done some research into the history of the area. Apparently, there was a burial ground nearby, though I've never been able to find any solid records about it. The local history seemed sparse, and despite my own attempts to look into it, I found very little information that connects the campground to anything paranormal. But even now, as I look back on that night, I can't shake the feeling that what we saw wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was something else, something I can't explain. Since that experience, I've become consumed with studying the paranormal. I've purchased EVP recorders, cameras, and sound equipment in an attempt to capture evidence of the world beyond. While I've had a few strange experiences since that night, none have been as personal or vivid as the encounter at Three Links Campground. That night in the rain, I saw something I still can't explain. A year after my mother passed away, I became very close with my adventurous friend Beth. She had a thrill-seeking nature that was contagious, and we spent countless hours exploring a small patch of forest behind her house. It became a routine for us, but every time I ventured into that forest, something unsettling happened. That night, I would dream of my mother. She would always be there in the dream, just staring at me. One evening, I had just come back from the woods and was in the kitchen cooking dinner. My mother had passed away in the room next to the kitchen after a long battle with cancer. As I stood there, I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. It was like the air in the room had grown heavy, and I couldn't move. Then, just as the feeling began to subside, I heard a whisper, a soft voice that said, "Don't go." It sounded so much like my mother that I froze. But at the time, I still didn't fully believe in ghosts. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and went to bed. That night, the dream came again. My mother was there, but this time she spoke to me. She warned me that there was something terrible in the forest. Then she pointed toward the trees. As I looked into the darkness, I saw what can only be described as a demon, something so terrifying that I woke up in a cold sweat. Despite the warning, I didn't listen. The next day, I went back into the forest with Beth. That day, we found a long, man-made tunnel, something like an old sewer system. Beth mentioned that people were said to have been killed there when it was first constructed. We decided to sit there for a while, chatting about school and life as the light began to fade. The darkness inside the tunnel became absolute, but we had brought a flashlight to see how long we could stay out. It was then that I heard it, faint laughter, like that of children echoing through the tunnel. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but when I glanced at Beth, I saw her staring into the darkness of the tunnel, her face pale and tense. I didn't want to look. Whatever she was seeing, I didn't want to know. The atmosphere grew heavier, and Beth whispered, "Stay here." Before I could respond, she left the tunnel, heading toward the sound of the laughter. I was alone. Standing there on the edge of the tunnel, I felt utterly vulnerable, like prey in a hunter's trap. The darkness pressed in on me, and the silence was deafening, until it wasn't. I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, a deep male voice whispered in my ear, "Don't turn around." Terrified, I spun around, ignoring the warning, but there was no one there. My flashlight caught only empty darkness. Then, I saw it, a quick flash of white, like a figure darting deeper into the tunnel. Beth returned moments later, and I told her what had happened. She didn't hesitate. "We need to leave," she said. We bolted through the tunnel, our screams echoing around us as we ran. But as we neared the exit, a piercing sound stopped us in our tracks. A woman's scream, filled with agony, reverberating through the tunnel. We didn't look back. We didn't stop running until we were home. That night changed everything for me. I stopped going into the forest at night. Even during the day, I feel like I'm being watched, as if the forest remembers. It's been 2 years since that night, but the memories are as vivid as ever. Since then, I've experienced other strange, almost psychic events. Many of them begin in dreams, just like the warnings from my mother, before manifesting in real life. I know what I've experienced is real. My grandfather passed away about 4 years ago. He was the first person I truly loved and lost, and his death left a void that nothing seemed to fill. I spent the weeks after his passing searching for any sign that he was at peace, anything to let me know that he was okay. Little did I know, signs were already starting to come through, ones that would shape the way I looked at life, death, and the connections between us all. A few weeks after his death, something happened that still gives me chills. My grandmother, who was 70 and blind, was lying in bed one night. My uncle, who had come to stay with her, was in the house caring for her. Grandma, despite being blind, had a sharpness to her that was unmatched. She knew when something was off. That night, she felt the bed shift as if someone had laid down beside her. She thought it was my uncle, sleepwalking perhaps, and called out his name. But when she called again, she realized his voice was coming from another room. She knew something, or someone, had laid beside her in the bed that night. Meanwhile, my uncle had his own unsettling experience. He had been sleeping on the couch in the living room, keeping a family photo on the table in front of him. My grandfather's picture was always facing him. But one morning, he woke up to find the picture turned around, facing the opposite direction. My grandmother couldn't move on her own, and my uncle was the only one in the house with her. So there was no explanation for how the photo had moved. It was a small detail, but it left us all wondering. Was my grandfather still with us? There was another incident that seemed even more inexplicable. A few days after my grandfather's death, my uncle was lying on the same couch where my grandfather used to rest. He said he suddenly couldn't breathe, like something was pressing down on his face. He described it as if someone had their hand over his mouth, smothering him. We all wondered if it was my grandfather's spirit, still lingering in the house, perhaps sitting in his favorite spot, just as he always had. It almost seemed like my uncle was in the place where my grandfather used to sit, and maybe in that moment, his spirit tried to rise from the couch and accidentally pressed down on him. For me, there was something strange about my acceptance into nursing school that tied back to my grandfather's passing. About a month after his death, I found out I hadn't been accepted into the program. I was devastated. Not only had I just lost my grandfather, but now I was crushed by the rejection. I talked to him every day, hoping for some kind of sign. And then, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from the school. They told me I had been considered and that I needed to come in that day to register because classes started the very next day. Everyone else had already been chosen, and somehow I was still given a chance. I've always believed that my grandfather had something to do with that. It was like a sign that he was still watching over me, guiding me in ways I couldn't fully understand. Other members of the family had their own experiences too. One of my aunts, who lived in a nearby county, had been sleeping alone on her couch when she woke up to see my grandfather standing in front of her. He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt and bending over her as though checking on her. She screamed, "What are you doing here?" before he vanished right before her eyes. She got up to check the rest of the house and found him again, standing in the kitchen, only to have him disappear once more. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying the video, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing where everyone's watching from. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more exciting content coming your way. Your support means a lot. But the most startling experience came from my other aunt, who was staying with my grandmother one day. My grandmother was lying in her bed when my aunt heard her talking to herself. Grandma was saying, "I said no, I'm not ready to go yet." When my aunt asked who she was talking to, Grandma replied, "It's your father. Don't you see him at the foot of the bed? He's trying to get me to come with him." My aunt said she never went back into that room again. Less than 14 months later, almost to the day, my grandmother passed away. These experiences, some frightening, some comforting, left a profound mark on me. They confirmed something I had always suspected, that love and connection don't end with death. My grandfather's presence was still felt in ways we couldn't explain, whether it was in the form of whispers, the shifting of a picture frame, or even a haunting visit. His spirit seemed to linger, watching over the family he had loved so much. I truly believe that the events surrounding his passing were his way of showing us he was okay, that he was at peace, and that he would never truly leave us. I was alone at home one evening around 7:30 p.m. My mom was at my aunt's house, and my dad was working on a car at my grandmother's place. I was in the kitchen, cooking soup and BBQ meat for myself, not thinking anything out of the ordinary. The house was quiet, until it wasn't. At about 9:00 p.m., the power suddenly went out. I was annoyed, but I quickly ran outside to the breaker box to reset it. When I came back inside, I noticed something strange. The door to my room was open, as if someone had walked through it and forgotten to close it. I thought it was odd, but I shrugged it off and went back to my dinner. No sooner had I sat down to eat than the power went out again. I sighed and ran outside again to trip the breaker, but this time it took longer to get the power back on. By the time I returned inside, a cold, heavy feeling settled over me. I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. I went around the house, turning on lights and TVs, trying to shake the unease. With the AC on, I noticed that the door to my room would move slightly with the flow of air. The strange thing was, I couldn't stop staring at it. It felt like my eyes were glued to it, and the longer I watched, the more I felt like something was off. After finishing my meal, I decided to go into my room to check out what had been drawing my attention. As I walked toward the door, the power cut out again. At that point, fear set in. I sprinted outside once more, but this time it took even longer to restore the electricity. When I finally managed to turn the lights back on, I went straight for my room. The door was completely shut, nothing unusual, except when I opened it. A chill rushed over me, cold enough to make me shiver. I hesitated in the doorway, the light from the kitchen casting my shadow onto the wall in front of me. I said, almost without thinking, "If anything isn't here, you need to get out right now." Just as the words left my mouth, I looked down and saw my black light box, which had been sitting on the floor, slide across the room. It moved slowly, almost like it was floating, about 5 feet from my dresser to my bed. I froze. Was this really happening? My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the box, unable to believe what I had just seen. Tears filled my eyes. My body went numb with fear, and I quickly slammed the door shut. I grabbed the phone and called my mom at my aunt's house, begging her to come home. She said she'd be there in about 5 minutes. I was relieved, until I heard footsteps on the porch a few minutes later. My heart skipped a beat as I rushed to open the door, but there was no one there. I immediately called my mom again, frantic. When she answered, I could barely choke out the words, "Please come home now." She sounded confused, asking if she hadn't already left. I told her no, she hadn't, and that I needed her now. When she finally arrived, I was beside myself, shaking with fear. I told her everything that had happened, about the power outages, the moving box, and the strange feeling of being watched. To my surprise, she said, "That's happened to you before." I was shocked. She hadn't told us because she didn't want to scare us, but now she was admitting it. I never did figure out what was in that house that night. When my ex-husband Jamie and I first moved into his dad's house, we were always told that it was haunted. Over the years, many people had experienced strange occurrences, but I never imagined I would be one of them. We lived in the upstairs of the house, and every morning, Jamie would get up for work. Since I was terrified to sleep alone upstairs, thanks to all the stories I had heard about the place, I'd go downstairs and sleep in his sister's room. It became a routine. Jamie would wake me up, and I'd climb into bed with his sister, where I'd feel a little safer. Before he left, he would come into her room to give me a kiss goodbye. We had a system where I'd raise my hand to show him which side of the bed I was on, so he wouldn't accidentally kiss the wrong side of my face. This particular morning went just as it always did. Jamie woke me up. I went downstairs and climbed into bed with his sister, and when he came in to say goodbye, I raised my hand, showing him which side of the bed I was on. He kissed me and left for work, and I went back to sleep. I woke up a while later to find my sister-in-law standing at the foot of the bed, folding clothes. The side of the bed where she normally slept was completely made up, and I asked her why she hadn't waited for me to get up so she could make the whole bed at once. She looked at me surprised and said, "I didn't sleep here last night. I slept with Dad because I was scared." I laughed, thinking she was playing a prank on me or trying to mess with me. But then she told me the bed had been made from the night before, and she hadn't slept in her room at all. To confirm, I asked her dad, and he said that she had, indeed, slept in his room that night because she was too scared to stay upstairs. Now I was really confused. I was certain that I hadn't slept alone. The whole night, someone had been with me. I could still feel the warmth of another body in the bed. Our feet had even touched, and more unsettling, I had raised my hand like I always did to show Jamie which side of the bed I was on. But Jamie hadn't been there, and his sister hadn't either. Later that night, when Jamie came home, I told him what had happened. We still don't know who or what was in that bed with me, but we both know someone, or something, was there. Neither of us has any idea if it was the spirit of someone who had lived in the house before, or something else entirely. But that night, I wasn't alone. Living in the UK and being a fan of theme parks, my husband and I have visited Alton Towers more times than I can count. The park is enormous, built on the grounds of a stately home with the same name, and like many places steeped in history, it comes with its own dark legends. One of the most intriguing stories is that of the chained oak, and it's tied to an attraction called Hex. This ride blends supernatural history with sensory tricks that leave you feeling disoriented and on edge. The story of the curse at Alton Towers, which inspired Hex, goes like this. On an autumn night in 1821, the Earl of Shrewsbury was returning home to Alton Towers when he encountered an old man in the road. The man asked for a coin, but the Earl cruelly dismissed him. In response, the old man muttered a curse. For every branch on the old oak tree that falls, a member of the Earl's family will die. The Earl mocked him and carried on his way, but that night a storm brewed and a single branch from the old oak tree fell. Later that night, a member of the Earl's family died suddenly and mysteriously. The next morning, the Earl ordered his servants to chain the branches of the tree to prevent any more from falling. Intrigued by the legend and determined to uncover more about the chained oak, my husband and I, along with my brother-in-law and a few others, set out to find the tree. We were told by the staff at the park that the tree was on private property, near a bed and breakfast called the Chained Oak. They warned us to be careful, though we weren't sure if it was because of the isolation or something more. The weather had been on and off with rain all day, but as we left the park and headed to the bed and breakfast, the clouds cleared and the sun came out. The friendly receptionist directed us to a path leading through the woods, giving us a cryptic smile and adding, "Just be careful. You never know what might be out there." The walk through the woods felt unusually long, and when we arrived at the clearing, it felt as though the atmosphere had shifted. There, standing in the middle of the clearing, was the old oak, enormous and imposing, with thick chains wrapped around the larger branches. The tree seemed ancient, its bark twisted and knotted in a way that felt almost unnatural. The air had become heavy, and just as we arrived, the rain started again, cold and thick. We didn't have any umbrellas, and since it wasn't a quick walk back to the cars, we decided to make the visit short. As I walked closer to the tree, I was struck by how alive it felt. The chains had actually grown into the tree itself, as if they were part of it now, and I could feel a strange vibration pulsing from the bark when I touched it. It was warm, unnaturally warm for a day so cool and damp. Despite the ominous feeling in the air, we decided to snap a few pictures. My brother-in-law's girlfriend and I posed for one, standing close to each other by the tree. The moment the camera flashed, something strange happened. In the picture, a dark spot appeared between us, like a section of the image had been blacked out, even though we were standing shoulder to shoulder. I also noticed, even though the sky had been overcast and rainy, the sun seemed to be shining through the leaves in the photo, casting an eerie glow. Later, when we reviewed the pictures on the digital camera, we were all stunned. Aside from the odd sunlit effect, there were numerous orbs scattered throughout the images, something none of us had noticed at the time of the visit. The feeling of being watched was shared by all of us, but it wasn't the type of fear that made you want to run. It was a strange, unsettling calm, a feeling of being in the presence of something other. After we left the tree and made our way back to the cars, the air seemed to lighten, but as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. The road back to the hotel seemed to stretch endlessly, and though nothing more happened that night, I was uneasy. When we got back to the hotel, I couldn't resist looking through the photos again. I was eager to share them with others, but before I had the chance, a sudden falling out with my brother-in-law led to a strange turn of events. In a fit of frustration, my husband, who often acts on impulse, might have deleted the pictures. I hope he didn't, as those images were the only evidence of the inexplicable events we witnessed that day. To this day, I'm not sure if it was the curse of the tree, the lingering spirits of the past, or something else entirely. But I know one thing for sure. The Chained Oak is not a place you visit lightly. Some things in this world are better left untouched. But unfortunately, we didn't leave the tree alone. A couple of years ago, I came across an old Ouija board, dated 1919. I had fond memories of using one when I was about 10, and being intrigued by the supernatural, I thought it would be fun to give it another try. When my son was very young, he once told me about an experience he had one night. He said he was lying in his bed and looked out his bedroom window to see 3 glowing figures coming from the field towards the house. He described how the figures entered his room and stood at the foot of his bed. He covered his head with blankets, hoping they would go away, but when he uncovered his head, they were still there. After a moment, they vanished. I chalked it up to a bad dream at the time, brushing it off as an overactive imagination. Our house has an old, beautiful building on the property, constructed in 1926. The builder even signed and dated his name in the rafters of the attic, which I thought was pretty cool, almost like an artist signing their work. One day, we were in this old house, messing around with the Ouija board just for fun. My son asked me to see if what he had seen that night was real. So I did, and what happened next completely caught me off guard. The 2 people who were with me at the time had no idea about the history of the area or anything to do with our property. They didn't even know the name of the road we lived on, which makes what happened next all the more eerie. I asked the board if there were any spirits who wanted to speak. To my surprise, the answer was yes. I continued, "Who are you?" "Anna Mills," the board spelled out. Curious, I asked, "Why are you here?" The planchette began moving quickly, spelling out, "I died here on the Munger Shagedo Road." I was taken aback. Our guests had no idea that our road was called Munger Shaw. "How?" I asked, trying to take the conversation lightly. "Turung-GK," it replied. "How?" I asked again. "Run over," Anna answered. "When?" I pressed further. 1936. By now, I was still trying to remain skeptical, thinking it was all just part of the game. But my curiosity was growing. I jokingly asked, "If all this is true, where is your body?" "I'll bring you some flowers." Her answer chilled me to the bone. "You are there," it spelled out. "What do you mean?" "S-T-K-E-T-E-R-E," the board replied, misspelled by an 8-year-old's handwriting. My AHSES, or SKATED, where your trailer how he is. Her answers just kept coming. She spoke of her uncles, elusive figures who were said to be protecting her. She told us she had been visiting them when she was run over by the truck and had died on the property. The strangest part, however, was what happened after the session. When I first placed the trailer house where it now stands, which I no longer live in, my ex-wife and I both distinctly heard the sound of a child crying. We couldn't explain it. My ex also mentioned seeing a small girl one night running out the door late at night, though we both dismissed it as some kind of half-awake hallucination. We did another Ouija session with a different group of people, and again, Anna Mills came through, saying much of the same things she had said before. I even tried to research her, but I couldn't find any records of a woman named Anna Mills from the 1930s. Maybe it was because it was such a rural area back then, and records weren't kept the way they are today. Some people even have relatives buried in their front yards around here, so who knows? At this point, I still didn't believe everything that was happening. I thought I was just imagining things, influenced by the Ouija board and the weird history of the place. That was until something happened one winter's night. I went for one of my usual walks across the field under the moonlight. On my way back, I saw 2 figures near the trailer. At first, I thought they might be intruders. As I approached, I yelled out to them, ready to confront whoever was lurking near my home. One of them, a man wearing a plaid shirt and bib overalls, turned and walked straight through the wall of the trailer, right beneath my son's old bedroom. He didn't walk around the house, he just went right through the wall, as if he was made of smoke or vapor. I was within 15 feet of him and could see his face clearly, every detail of his clothes. It felt real. I was shocked but not terrified. In fact, I felt oddly comforted. The other person ran off into the woods. I tried to brush this off as a trick of the mind, or just being half asleep on my walk, but it stuck with me. Then about a month ago, I was visiting my sister's house. Her daughter had an old Ouija board that her father had found in an attic years ago. The planchette was missing, so I made a replacement in his wood shop. We sat down with it, and just out of curiosity, I asked, "Anna, are you here?" To my utter surprise, the board spelled out, "Hi, Rickett. Hey everyone. I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way." This really freaked everyone out. I hadn't told anyone at the table anything about Anna or the previous encounters, but here she was, coming through again. I asked her about the things she had told me before, and sure enough, the board spelled out all the same details, that she had once seen me, that she and her uncles had visited my son, and that she felt at home in the old house, even though she said she would never enter it due to bad MEMMORS. Lately, my son and I have both seen someone fleeting past the kitchen window late at night. Our dog also alerts us as if someone is there, but when we check, no one is around. It's strange. The last time I used the Ouija board, I was more skeptical than ever, but I let someone else handle it. This time, the board spelled out that Anna wanted to meet me at the edge of the field at 1 o'clock in the morning. I asked, "Promise?" She responded, "I promise." But I never went. I'm still not sure if I believe all of this, but it's hard to ignore the strange experiences that seem to tie back to Anna Mills. The weird thing is, Anna seems to have moved on. She now haunts the people living in the trailer, though I never shared this story with them. They've seen her too, and they find her presence sweet and comforting, like the child she was in life. They've even adopted her in a way, and sometimes she visits my old house. We even talk to her on the Ouija board sometimes, just as I did before. So maybe there's something to all of this. Maybe it's true. Or maybe it's just a strange game that's gone way beyond what anyone could have expected. Either way, I'll never be able to look at an old Ouija board the same way again. It was early fall 2002, and I was sleeping soundly through the night, lost in some obscure and pointless dream. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a sound I can't easily describe. It was something like a combination of an ambulance siren mixed with the sound of a squirrel being crushed by a Mack truck, only at an unbearable volume. As a very light sleeper who suffers from insomnia, I woke up immediately. Fully awake now, I stood up and walked into the hallway to investigate. The sound had quieted but now was reduced to a series of erratic hissing noises. It was clear the noise was coming from my cat, Acorn. The puffy calico was standing, poised for a fight at the gate separating the stairs from the hallway. Following her intense gaze, I looked toward the top of the stairs and saw what appeared to be a large dog, its head peering over the gate. At that moment, I didn't even think twice about the size of the animal. We had 4 dogs at the time, so I assumed one of them had somehow made its way upstairs. Acorn, seeing me, bolted straight into my bedroom and hid behind the dresser, still hissing. I glanced back at the stairs, but the dog was gone. Confused but curious, I cautiously walked downstairs to investigate. To my surprise, all 3 of our dogs were fast asleep in their usual spots, completely undisturbed by the noise. My younger sister, who had been sleeping on the sofa, was now awake as well. "Was that your cat making that noise?" she asked, sounding a bit bewildered. "Yeah, there was a dog at the top of the stairs. Did Michelle's dog come out of her room at all?" I asked, trying to reason it out. I assumed it might have been Michelle's dog, the largest of the bunch, because Acorn hated him. "No, Michelle took him with her to Angela's," she replied. There was the answer. Michelle's dog wasn't even in the house. My sister and I exchanged a look, neither of us quite sure what to make of the situation. After a long pause, I muttered, "Well, I'm going back to bed." Still a little confused about what had just happened, I turned and went back upstairs. In the back of my mind, I knew something supernatural had occurred. It seemed like a ghost dog or something just as unexplainable had made an appearance. but there were no clear answers to be found that night, so I tried to let it go and return to sleep. The next day, I wasn't surprised to hear that Acorn's bizarre antics had woken more than just my sister and me. My mother was none too pleased about the idea of a magical ghost dog frightening my cat into a state of feline hysteria. From that point on, Acorn was ordered to stay in my room at night. After everything she had been through, I think she was more than happy to oblige. It was a Saturday night, and I was about 14 at the time. My sister, my mom, her partner, and I had gone out for a cinema trip followed by a meal. It was something we often did on weekends, though I suspected my mom's partner was trying to impress us. After dropping us home, he headed back to his flat, and we all went to bed, as it was quite late. My sister fell asleep immediately, but as usual, I struggled to get comfortable. I've always had trouble sleeping, often dealing with bouts of insomnia. A few hours later, I got out of bed, intending to do one of my regular late-night wanderings, maybe grab a snack, watch some TV, or even fall asleep on the sofa. The sofa always felt more inviting than my bed. As I passed my mom's room, I noticed the door was slightly open. I thought I'd check to see if she was asleep. The room wasn't too dark. There was a street lamp outside, so I could see pretty clearly. I saw my mom curled up, fast asleep, snuggled up to the wall. But on the other side of the bed, I saw a man lying there, propped up on the pillows, on top of the covers. As soon as I saw him, I jumped back behind the door. The way he was facing suggested he was awake and looking directly at me. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately assumed it was my mom's boyfriend. He had the same build, skinny, rounded shoulders, square face, and wavy hair. I didn't get a good look at his face, though. I wasn't exactly in the mood to stick around to see. I took another glance to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I was sure my mom's boyfriend had left. I had heard him go. When I looked again, the man was still there, in the same position, but it was hard to tell if he had seen me or not. My mind raced, but I wasn't sure what was going on. I jumped back again, and then cautiously took another peek. Who else could it have been? It looked just like him. But why was he lying like that? Half sitting up, staring straight ahead, motionless. It was a little unnerving. At that point, I assumed my mom must have snuck him back in somehow. I wasn't sure if he was awake or not, so I went back to bed. I briefly looked out the window to see if his car was parked outside, but I couldn't see it. I thought maybe he parked around the corner. After reading for a while, I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I told my sister about what I had seen. We both decided to confront Mom and her boyfriend. We marched straight to her room, but he was gone. My mom was awake, still in bed. We asked her about him, and she seemed confused. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying the video, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing where everyone's watching from. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more exciting content coming your way. Your support means a lot. She told us that we had seen him leave the night before. Obviously, we didn't believe her and pressed her for answers. We kept asking her questions until she finally got angry and demanded to know why we'd think she'd lie about something like that. It wasn't like we had any issues with him. I told her exactly what I had seen, and she looked genuinely scared. At first, she didn't believe me, but when she realized I was serious, we all started to feel a little uneasy. They asked the usual questions. Could I have been dreaming? No, I didn't fall asleep. Was I sure about what I had seen? Absolutely. The man in the bed looked as solid and real as my mom on the other side. A couple of days later, I was reflecting on what had happened, and my attention was drawn to a photograph of my mom's dad on the shelf. He had wavy hair, a square face, was kind of skinny, and had rounded shoulders. The resemblance to the man I'd seen in the bed was uncanny. My mom once went to a clairvoyant a year or so before this event. The clairvoyant had told her that her dad, who had passed away when she was 14, often visited her and liked to watch over her while she slept. Could it have been him that I saw that night? It all started when I was 7. 20 years ago now. I was a curious kid, always exploring the land around our home. Our house sat alone, miles away from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by endless rows of cornfields. Beyond them, the woods stretched deep and dark, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I loved the quiet, the solitude. Maybe I was just used to being alone. Or maybe I never knew what loneliness really felt like. My parents ran a small farm, passed down through generations. My dad spent his days tending the crops while my mom kept the house in order. They loved each other, and they loved our simple life. In the summer, I'd wake up early, run outside barefoot through the damp morning grass, and spend the day collecting rocks, watching insects skim the surface of the creek, or chasing the wind through the fields. I didn't eat much. We lived off a single-lane dirt road miles from the nearest town. On one side of our house, the cornfields stretched endlessly toward the horizon, tall and green, swaying with the wind like an ocean frozen in time. On the other side, acres of open grassland ran all the way to the tree line where the woods thickened. The forest was old, older than the farm, older than the town itself. I spent my childhood venturing deeper into its shadows, but this isn't about the woods. This is about the cornfields. This is about the house that appeared out of nowhere. It happened on a sticky June night, the air so thick it felt like a second skin. I remember tossing and turning in bed, sweat slick on my neck, the ceiling fan doing little to help. Sometime after midnight, I woke up, my throat dry. I kicked off my sheets and stumbled toward the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed my bedroom window, something made me stop. I don't know what it was at first, just a feeling, a strange pull toward the glass. When I looked out, my breath caught in my throat. A house. A house stood in the middle of the cornfield across the dirt road, right where there had been nothing but open land the day before. It was massive, 3 stories tall, its dark silhouette cutting against the star-dusted sky. My hands gripped the windowsill, my nose pressing against the cool glass as I stared. The house was black, at least that's what I'd realize in the morning. Its windows, gaping and empty, were framed by hideous yellow shutters that looked sickly in the moonlight. There was no porch, no lights, just a single door painted the same nauseating yellow as the shutters. I didn't feel afraid, not at first. I was a kid, and kids don't think about things the way adults do. I didn't question how or why the house was there. I didn't wonder who had built it overnight, or why I hadn't seen anyone moving in. My 7-year-old mind only saw a mystery, an adventure waiting to happen. I thought about running to wake my parents, but even then, something held me back. A strange voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Just go back to bed." I took one last look at the dark house, its windows like emptied eyes staring back at me, before turning away. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with cold water, and swallowed it down in one gulp. By the time I made it back to bed, my excitement had settled, replaced by the heavy pull of exhaustion. I let sleep take me, my dreams restless and filled with shifting shadows. I didn't know it then, but that was the last peaceful night I would have in that house. Because the next day, everything changed. The next morning, I shot out of bed before the sun had fully climbed over the horizon. The sky was still bruised with deep purples and streaks of soft pink, but I barely noticed. I raced to my window, heart pounding. The house was still there, dark, silent, watching. A surge of excitement ran through me. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I bolted out of my room, nearly colliding with my dad in the kitchen. He grunted, barely awake, clutching his coffee. "Dad, did you see it?" I practically shouted. He frowned, shaking his head. "See what?" "The house." I was bouncing on my toes, ready to drag him outside. "It's right across the road. It wasn't there yesterday. You have to come look." I barely waited for him to answer before grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the front door. I flung it open, stepping onto the porch, my bare feet tingling against the cool wood. I turned, ready to see my dad's reaction, but he wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at me, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning the field beyond the road. His confusion turned into something else, something that made my stomach twist. "Dad, it's right there." I pointed. His gaze followed my finger, but I could tell. He didn't see it. I felt my throat tighten. "Dad, it's right there. Big, black, 3 stories, right in the middle of the field." He scratched his chin, glancing down at me, his expression unreadable. "I think you had a weird dream, kid. Come on inside. If you've got this much energy, you can help me in the fields." "No," I stomped my foot. "I didn't dream it. It's right there." But no matter how much I insisted, no matter how desperately I pointed and pleaded, my dad only sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose before stepping back inside. I was alone. Alone with the house. That night, the storm came. The rain started slow, whispering against the windows, but by midnight, it was hammering the walls, shaking the house to its bones. Thunder cracked like gunfire, rattling the glass in my room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling small. I thought about going to my parents' room. My dad was probably snoring through it, but my mom might be awake. Another boom of thunder sent a tremor through my chest. I swallowed hard, gripping the blanket. Brave men only get brave when they stand up to the thing that makes them want to run away. That's what my dad always said. I forced myself to sit up. If I was scared, I had to look. Sliding out of bed, I padded toward the window. The wind howled, rattling the glass. Rain pounded against the roof, 1,000 tiny fists hammering to get in. A flash of lightning split the sky. For a second, the world went white. And in that second, I saw it. The house. It was back. Standing exactly where it had been the night before. Only this time, the top window wasn't empty. Someone was standing there, watching me. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the moonlight behind thick, churning clouds. Sheets of rain battered the glass as I pressed my face against my bedroom window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was there. A black shape sat just beyond the tree line across the field, a square of deeper darkness against the stormy night. My pulse pounded in my ears. I'd seen it before, right there in the same spot, but my parents never believed me. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I held my breath, waiting. Another streak of lightning cut across the sky, flashing white against the endless black. The house was back. A rush of cold prickled my skin. This was real. I wasn't imagining it. I nearly ran to my parents' room to shake them awake, to tell them I was right, that I wasn't crazy. But I hesitated. My dad wasn't the type to appreciate being woken up in the middle of the night, especially not over something like this. Instead, I stayed glued to the window, fingers gripping the windowsill so tightly they ached. Another flash of lightning split the sky. The front door of the house was wide open. A sick feeling coiled in my gut. No one just leaves their front door open in the middle of a storm. The wind howled through the trees, rain slashing at the empty doorway like it was trying to push its way inside. Something was wrong. I swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware of the deep shadows in my room, the way the storm seemed to muffle every sound except my own heartbeat. I kept staring, waiting for another flicker of light, dreading what I might see next. It came, and something was standing in the doorway. A tall, twisted blur of color, distorted by the rain, shifting like it wasn't fully solid. It was looking right at me. My breath hitched. My stomach flipped. I dove away from the window, dragging my blankets over my head, curling into a ball like I was 6 years old again, hiding from the monsters under the bed. But this one wasn't under my bed. It was outside, watching. The next day, when morning came, the house was gone. I stayed by the window for almost an hour, scanning the empty patch of field where it had stood, trying to convince myself that my mind had played tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. Even in the bright light of day, I couldn't shake the image of that gaping doorway, of that thing staring back at me. I barely touched my breakfast, lost in thought as my parents talked about the day's plans. My ears perked up when my mom mentioned that the Harveys were coming over for dinner. That meant Ethan was coming. A wave of relief crashed over me. Ethan was my best friend. He wouldn't laugh at me. He believed me. I practically inhaled the rest of my pancakes and bolted from the table, eager to lose myself in the carefree energy of a summer day. I ran through the tall grass, the smell of earth and morning dew filling my lungs. My bare feet skimmed over the damp ground as I made my way to the woods, passing the exact spot where the house had been. I hesitated. What if? I shook the thought from my mind and took off running again. The day passed in a blur of warm sunshine and laughter, splashing in the creek, building forts, pretending we were explorers on some grand adventure. For a little while, I forgot about the house, the storm, the thing in the doorway. But the sun always sets, and when I came out of the woods that evening, stomach growling, heart light from a perfect summer day, the house was back. The house returns. I froze. Something was different this time. The house was facing me. My skin prickled. A cold, creeping dread slithered through me, replacing the warmth of the day. Before, it had been turned toward my house. Now it stood squarely in my path, blocking my view of home. I swallowed hard. The windows were dark, empty. I forced myself to move, circling it in a wide arc, never taking my eyes off the front door. My pulse hammered, every muscle in my body ready to bolt the second something moved. But nothing did. I was almost past it when my nerves shattered. I ran. The grass slapped against my legs, damp and cool. My breath came in short gasps as I tore toward my front porch, every instinct screaming at me to get inside. I leaped up the steps, chest heaving, my fingers barely wrapping around the doorknob before I turned. And the house was facing me again. My heart nearly stopped. That wasn't possible. It had turned. I staggered back against the door, gripping the handle like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. For a long moment, I just stood there staring. The house sat in the field, unmoving, watching. I squeezed my eyes shut and took a slow, shaky breath. No, this was just my imagination, a trick of the light, a trick of my own fear. I forced myself to turn away, and I went inside. But the house wasn't done with me. The smell of baked chicken and buttery mashed potatoes filled the air, wrapping the house in a warm, inviting aroma. Laughter echoed from the kitchen as my mom stirred a pot on the stove, chatting with Ethan's parents, who were sitting at the dining table with my dad. Kept effing waiting, my mom called with a smirk. I mumbled a hello to his parents, who greeted me before slipping back into their conversation. Ethan, standing by the hallway, was practically bouncing on his heels. Dude, I started building a fort in the woods behind your house, he blurted out as I headed to the bathroom to wash my hands. He followed, continuing to ramble excitedly. It's gonna be sick. We need to add a lookout spot, maybe even a trapdoor. I nodded along as I dried my hands. Did you notice anything weird on your way here? Ethan frowned. Weird how? I led him down the hall to the front door and pointed. Across the field, sitting just beyond the dirt road, was an old, blackened house with faded yellow shutters. It looked as though it had been abandoned for decades, the wood sagging, the windows empty. Can you see it? I asked, hesitant. Ethan snorted and clapped me on the back. Yeah, it's right there. Relief washed over me. I stepped onto the porch, the evening air cooling my skin. I've been seeing weird things over there, I admitted, and my parents don't even. Ethan cut me off, his face lighting up with a grin. Have you checked it out? I stiffened. No way. Something about that house. It feels wrong. His grin widened. So you're scared of it? I don't think it's safe, I said quickly. My parents don't see it. It's like it's not even there for them. And the other night when it stormed, I swear something was watching me from one of the windows. That only made him more interested. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he nudged me. Dude, we have to check it out. No, I snapped. Before Ethan could argue, my dad called me to set the table. Dinner saved me from the conversation, for now. After dinner, Ethan and I sat on the front steps, staring at the house. The moon bathed the field in silver light, fireflies blinking in and out of the shadows like tiny lanterns. "We should go look inside," Ethan whispered. I shivered. "I really don't think we should." Ethan rolled his eyes. "What's the worst that could happen? It's just an old house." I opened my mouth to protest, but he was already on his feet. "If you won't go, I will," he said with a grin, jotting down the steps. Panic shot through me. "Ethan, don't." Too late. I watched as he stepped into the tall grass, heading straight for the house. His figure grew smaller against the dark backdrop, his movements blending into the shadows. 30 feet away. My mouth went dry. 20 feet. Something felt wrong. The house loomed over the field like a predator. Its yellow shutters, once faded, now resembled jagged, yellowed teeth. 10 feet. Ethan slowed, hesitation creeping into his steps. He turned to glance at me, maybe second-guessing himself. That's when I saw it. A dim glow flickered in the top left window of the third floor. A candle? The light hovered there for a moment, then began to move. My stomach clenched. "Ethan." I called, my voice barely above a whisper. The glow passed from one window to the next. It was getting closer. "Ethan, come back." I ran down the steps, heart hammering. He turned, confused. "What's wrong?" "Come back now." I sprinted across the road, trampling through the grass. The glow had reached the second floor. It wasn't flickering like a candle anymore. It drifted from window to window, smooth, deliberate. Like someone was carrying it. Ethan hesitated. I was almost to him when the glow reappeared, on the first floor. The window he had been about to peek into was now filled with an eerie, pulsing light. I skidded to a stop, breath hitched in my throat. Something was watching. "Ethan," I whispered, "run." He turned, his eyes going wide. Then, without a sound, the house went completely dark. We bolted. We didn't stop running until we reached my porch, slamming the door behind us. Our chests heaved, sweat sticking to our foreheads. Inside, my parents were still at the table, laughing with Ethan's mom and dad. The smell of cherry pie hung thick in the air, but I felt sick. I should have told them. I should have said something. But what could I say? "Hey, Mom, Dad, Ethan and I saw a haunted house that you guys are apparently blind to, and it might be alive." "Yeah, right." Ethan and I locked eyes across the table. An unspoken pact settled between us. We would never talk about this. His mom chuckled. "You boys back already? Or did the smell of dessert lure you inside?" I forced myself to eat, even though every bite felt like chewing on rubber. I kept glancing at the door. My mind raced with impossible fears. What if it came knocking? What if whatever lived in that house followed us? Even as we whooped in excitement over my parents allowing Ethan to stay for 2 nights, my nerves didn't settle. We ran upstairs, grabbing crayons to sketch out our tree fort plans, filling the air with wild stories of secret hideouts and imaginary battles. For a moment, I almost forgot. Almost. Then, while Ethan said goodbye to his parents, I wandered to my bedroom window. I glanced across the field. The house was gone. It was past midnight. Ethan lay snoring in the sleeping bag my mom had laid out for him. He was curled up, his head barely poking out from the opening. I had no idea why I was still awake. The house was silent. My parents long asleep in their room down the hall. Even with Ethan there, I felt uneasy, like something else was in the room with us. I scanned the darkness, the closet, the corners, the small gap where my bedroom door was cracked open. My mind turned shadows into monsters before my eyes adjusted, and they melted back into the dark. I thought about waking Ethan, but I didn't want him calling me a chicken again. Then the feeling worsened. I felt exposed, like something was watching me. Not from the closet, not from the door, from the window. A chill slithered down my spine. The feeling was so intense, so overwhelming, that I almost didn't want to look. But I had to. My heart pounded as I slowly turned my head toward the glass. The only thing there was moonlight, trickling through like liquid silver. No eyes, no shadowed figure, no candle flickering in the night. Relief trickled in, but it was fragile, fleeting. because now I felt something else. A pull. It was like something was gently urging me forward, drawing me toward the window, daring me to come closer. I resisted at first, but the sensation wouldn't stop. I knew I wasn't getting back to sleep until I faced whatever had me in its grip. Carefully, I slid out from under my covers, stepping around Ethan's sleeping bag. Each step sent a spike of dread through my body like ice water running through my veins. A voice, my own voice, screamed in my head, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." But I did. I reached the window. I looked out, and my breath caught in my throat, my hands clamping over my mouth before a scream could escape. Outside, the house across the field stood just where it always had, dark, silent. But something huge was peeking over its roof. Its head alone spanned the length of the house. The eyes, almost human, stared directly at me, wide and hungry. Its two massive hands gripped the rooftop, its fingers curling over the shingles, making the entire scene look like a child peeking over a table. The night looked almost white around it. The darkness of its body was so deep, so unnatural, that it seemed to burn into the world like a brand. Its two enormous white eyes glowed against its pitch-black face, and inside those two circles of hellish moonlight, sharp red irises blazed like molten fire. And then I saw its mouth. It was grinning. The teeth were too big, too square, too wrong. They practically exploded from the shadows, impossibly bright and wide, like a Cheshire cat from a nightmare. It never blinked. It just watched. And then its smile grew wider. Every single fear I had ever had ripped through me at once. I couldn't move. I waited for it to do something. To speak. To move. To crawl down from the roof and take me. But it just watched. Then, something whispered my name. From the crack in my bedroom door. I spun, barely choking back a scream. A single massive eye stared at me through the gap in the doorway. And below it, the curve of a mouth, grinning, stretched across the darkness. A long black hand gripped the wood. I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. And then the door opened. The thing stepped inside. It was tall, taller than the doorway itself. Its skin was moving, shifting in slow, swirling patterns, like black paint being mixed in water. And its face. It was never solid. It was always changing. An eye would form, huge, round, lidless, then sink back into the liquid abyss of its head. The mouth did the same, appearing and disappearing in twisted, stretched grins. Then it spoke. Its voice wasn't just one voice. It was many. Dozens of voices, whispering, laughing, screaming, filtered through what sounded like rushing water. I sank back into my bed, my body shaking uncontrollably. I tried to scream, but my throat was locked tight with terror. And then I heard movement. A rustling, a thump, a dragging sound. I peeped out from my covers. Ethan's sleeping bag was gone. So was Ethan. I heard his muffled, confused voice from the hallway. Then it changed. Panic blossomed in his words. I heard him cry out. The front door crashed open. I jumped, letting out a tiny squeak of terror. The dragging sound moved down the porch. I scrambled to the window, my eyes burning with tears. And I saw it. A second one, smaller, but just as black, just as twisted. It was dragging Ethan's sleeping bag across the field. The enormous one, still perched atop the house, watched. Its grin never wavered. The front door of the black house swung open on its own, yawning with darkness. And I screamed. I screamed until my throat felt like it was ripping open. My dad burst into my room, grabbing my shoulders, shaking me. I pointed. But the house was gone. They never found Ethan. They searched for months, but no evidence of a break-in, no footprints, no house was ever found. His parents never spoke to mine again. I never spoke of that night. Until 2 days ago, when the police called me. They said they found someone, a child. And the child knew my name. I wasn't ready. The officer's hand was heavy on my shoulder before I stepped inside. "You need to prepare yourself," he said. Nothing could have prepared me. The boy in the hospital bed was tiny, frail. His chest rose and fell with thin, rattling breaths. And he was completely white. Not pale, not albino. White, like polished bone, like porcelain. His skin, his eyes, his lips, all of it. He looked like he had been sculpted from wax. Then his eyes shifted, and he whispered my name. I sat beside him, my hands trembling. What happened? I croaked. Ethan, it's been 20 years. His unblinking, white eyes locked onto mine. They're coming. I swallowed hard. Who? His lips barely moved. The grins. A chill crashed over me like an ocean wave. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper now. They're ready. They will come now, as children. My blood went ice cold. I reached for my phone, dialed my wife. My hands shook. I needed to know where my son was. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In 2 miles, take exit 19 for Hollow Creek Road. Siri chirped from my sister's phone. Charlotte, turn that off. I know where I'm going, I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. You sure about that? I mean, it's been what, 20 years? She teased, leaning back in her seat. Charlotte, please. Like I could ever forget where Hollow Creek Amusement Park is. We spent every summer there, I replied, shaking my head. It's here. Charlotte suddenly flung her arm in front of my face, pointing out the window. Oh my God, look. The coasters. That twisted metal one. Wasn't that called Steel something? No, wait, that's Mayhem Mountain, isn't it? I gently pushed her arm back. I couldn't fault her excitement. I was trying hard to control my own. The moment I saw the first shining rails above the treetops, I felt like a kid again. That's the Steel Vortex, I told her. Mayhem Mountain is on the other end of the park. And that wooden one over there, that's the Revenant. Oh yeah, I remember those. I was too much of a wuss to ride Steel Vortex, but I rode the hell out of the Revenant, she grinned. Well, Charlotte, you're an adult now. Time to take on Vortex, I said, smirking. As long as they've tested it and made sure it won't kill me, she shot back. That was the question, wasn't it? We didn't know which rides were cleared and which weren't. Brandon was supposed to be handling that, but I hadn't been able to get a straight answer out of him. If you told me at 12 years old that my wild-eyed, reckless best friend Brandon Myers would end up graduating with a business degree and leading this whole venture, I would have laughed in your face. But here we were. We had made a pact that summer, 1989, the year Hollow Creek Amusement Park shut down for good. Brandon had gathered our little group and made us swear one day we'd own it. Of course, at 12, we thought we'd just buy it and ride the coasters all day. We even planned which friends we'd let in and which kids from school would be banned. It had always been our park. It had taken 20 years, but somehow we'd done it. We bought the park, with a whole lot of pushing from Brandon, a loan bigger than my worst nightmare, and a hefty amount of collateral from Tyler. We made it happen. And now we were here. There, that's our exit, Charlotte shouted. I turned off the highway and followed the winding road until the vast, empty parking lot came into view. The old Hollow Creek Amusement Park sign still stood, though the letters were faded, rusted. A Lexus, a Mini Cooper, an old Chevelle, and a Honda Civic. A rental like ours. Looks like we're the last ones, Charlotte said. Sure enough, near the abandoned ticket booths, our friends stood waving at us. Oh my God, is that Tyler? He's so skinny now. And Brandon, Jesus, he's losing his hair. Holy crap, is that Koji? Koji got hot. Charlotte practically bounced in her seat. Calm down, Paris Hilton. Same rules as when we were kids. My friends are off limits to you, I said. Which half of them are married? She shot back. I sighed, shaking my head as we climbed out of the car. The moment I saw everyone standing together, a strange, bittersweet feeling hit me. I saw these guys every year, but being here, standing at the entrance to our park. It was like stepping into a dream. Mark freaking Lantis. Tyler called, his voice still as cocky as ever. Yeah, can you believe it? I laughed, pulling him into a hug. Back at the front gates, remembering when this place was $15 a ticket. 15. Brandon scoffed. Try 65 a day minimum. People will pay it. Charlotte grinned. Koji frowned. Are we sure about that? I mean, even Disneyland. One of our investors works for Disney. Brandon cut in, rolling his eyes. Trust me, we know what people will pay. As they debated ticket prices, my eyes wandered toward a figure standing quietly near the booth. It was Scott. Scott, the quietest of us. He hadn't invested as much as the others. He worked at his dad's shop, never had a lot of money. He wasn't saying much now either. Something about the way he stood, shifting his weight. I realized it wasn't embarrassment. Scott was just uneasy. We didn't need tickets. We owned the place now. Brandon led us on a tour, not of the layout. We already knew that, but of his vision for the park's revival. The Revenant needs the most work, he explained. Wood rots. We might have to rebuild most of it. Do we have the money for that? Scott finally spoke. Tyler says we do, Brandon answered. Mr. Moneybags. I nudged Tyler. Oh, those 6 BMW dealerships are treating me just fine. Tyler smirked. Charlotte threw her arms around him and Koji. Can we ride something already? Brandon sighed. Fine. Half the rides have passed inspection. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Steel Vortex. Yep, open. Snapdragon. Good to go. Renegade Falls. Water's not running. High Roller? Yes. Space Spin? Oh yeah. Power Tower. Still waiting on the final check. There was only one ride I cared about. What about Mayhem Mountain? Brandon hesitated. Then, yeah, it's open. The groans from the others were immediate. Oh God, I hate that ride, Koji said. I designed something just like it for Disney Fantasyland. That should tell you something. It's an awesome ride, I said. Long, fast, and goes upside down. Even Charlotte's too scared to ride it. I'm not scared, she said quickly. Then, quieter. That ride just gives me the creeps. We rode everything. One person always had to stay back to operate the rides, but otherwise it was just us, looping through roller coasters over and over like we were kids again. But the whole time, my eyes kept drifting to the back of the park, to the towering rails of Mayhem Mountain. There would be no arguing over the front row for that ride. It was always me and Brandon. Always. And yet, something felt wrong. Like the park was watching us. The air felt thicker near Mayhem Mountain. The shadows longer. The wooden beams older than they should be. The closer we got, the more I felt it. That unease clawing at the edges of my mind. This was our park. So why did it feel like we weren't alone? What do you think? Have you ever returned somewhere from your childhood that didn't feel quite the same? Let me know in the comments. The sun dipped below the horizon as we approached Summit Park, bathing the sky in shades of deep orange and crimson. A familiar mix of excitement and unease twisted in my stomach. But this time, there was no rush to leave before the gates closed, because the park didn't close. We could stay until sunrise if we wanted, riding our favorite coasters under the moonlight, an experience we'd only ever dreamed of. I stepped up to the entrance of Mayhem Mountain, my pulse quickening at the sight of its towering steel frame cutting into the evening sky. Then Tyler's voice interrupted my trance. Hey man, can we grab something to eat before we ride Mayhem? You really want to ride after eating? I smirked. That drop alone might send your burger right back up. Don't forget the inline roll, Brandon chimed in. Right? 2 loops total. And it's a 2-minute ride. If your food's not sitting well, that's 2 long minutes of regret. I laughed. Fine. Let's ride it a couple times, then eat, Tyler relented. We weaved through the queue, the neon lights of the platform flickering in the deepening dusk. As we reached the loading bay, our favorite train, a sleek green coaster car, waited on the track. Green car, Brandon and I shouted in unison, grinning as the people behind us groaned. Charlotte, arms crossed, hung back near the controls. I'll just stay here and work the launch panel. Still scared after all these years, Scott teased, ruffling her hair before hopping into the first row behind us. Danny slid in beside him. Tyler and Koji took the row behind them. We pulled down our shoulder restraints. Ready? Brandon called back. Send it through. Charlotte pulled the lever, and with a clunk, the train rolled forward. The familiar click-click-click of the lift hill filled my ears, and I turned to Brandon. Did we get the green car on purpose? I grinned. Yeah, I made sure Rich left it in the loading bay. The train crested the first drop, and as we plunged into the ride, my mind reeled at how unreal it felt, owning this place. Every track, every screw, from the main gate to the forgotten storage sheds out back. It was ours. If only I could go back in time and tell my younger self, standing in line for 2 hours, one day you'll own Mayhem Mountain. We tore through the first vertical loop, whipped around a banked turn past the glowing gift shop windows, and spiraled into the inline roll before screaming back into the station. Charlotte barely waited for confirmation before sending us through again. We rode 3 more times before finally stepping off. Koji lingered at the control panel. Hey, do you guys know what Track B is? Track B, Brandon frowned, stepping up beside him. It's right here on the switchboard, Koji said, pointing. Huh, probably just an old maintenance track, Scott shrugged. No, that's called a transfer track, Koji countered. This is something else. I crossed my arms. I've ridden this thing hundreds of times. There's no other track. Then let's find out, Scott said, grinning. Brandon's face darkened. Hell no. If we don't know what it is, it means it hasn't been inspected. That's a death wish. It's probably just a reverse track, Koji reasoned. We'll be fine. Scott smirked. Mark, you in? I hesitated but forced a grin. What's the worst that could happen? Charlotte shook her head. No way. So it was just the 6 of us. Tyler saluted dramatically. Oh, Captain, my captain. We strapped in. Are you sure about this? Charlotte's voice wavered. Brandon yelled back, pull it. The brakes released. As the train rolled forward into the twilight, the lights of the park glowed around us like distant stars. The ride felt the same, at first. The familiar clank of the chain lift pulled us up, and Brandon and I scanned the track ahead. Nothing seemed different. Then we passed the inline roll, and instead of flipping, the track dropped straight down, into the ground. A gaping black hole swallowed us whole. The descent, the restraints released. I gripped the seat in blind panic. My friends' screams echoed behind me as we twisted through a disorienting corkscrew in complete darkness. When we emerged into dim yellow light, I gasped. We were in a massive underground chamber, lined with rusted metal beams. The track twisted into loops, spirals, and drops that vanished into the abyss. Some of the dim bulbs flickered, revealing sections of track that simply ended. Far in the distance, my stomach dropped as I saw the worst of them all, a vertical peak with no descent. I turned back to Brandon. His face was pale. We need to get off this ride. But the train kept climbing. A loud sob broke through the air. Tyler fell. He fell out, Koji screamed. My breath caught in my throat. Scott's voice cracked. He hit the track below. The restraints locked back down. We dove into another inverted loop, the force crushing my chest. Brandon was crying now, gripping the edge of the seat. I don't want to die in here, man, he choked out. The train slowed. Ahead of us, the track split into 4 different directions. Each had a color-coded section, red, blue, green, orange. Beneath us, a blinking console appeared with matching buttons. Koji shook my shoulder. Which track are we connected to? I scanned the junction. Green. Koji followed the green track with his eyes until it reached the unfinished peak. It leads to the dead end. Scott spoke through ragged breaths. Hit the blue. Maybe the water. No, Koji whispered. Orange. It drops. Maybe there's more track below. I had seconds to decide. My hand hovered over the buttons. Then I slammed my palm onto orange. The track switched beneath us. Danny was crying. Then we dropped. The escape. We shot down the orange track, twisting between rusted beams. Up ahead, I spotted one last loop. And something in my gut told me this was our only way out. Let go. Fall out in the loop. I screamed back. No one responded. I didn't blame them. As the train flipped upside down, the restraints unlocked. I let go. I barely registered the impact as my body slammed into the ground below. Pain exploded through me. I gasped, struggling to stay conscious. Somewhere above me, the train kept going. I was too broken to move, but I forced my head up. The orange track vanished into another pit. My friends were gone. I barely managed a whisper. Koji? No answer. I dragged myself forward. I didn't know why. Maybe to see if anyone had survived. Then I saw it. A massive, dust-covered observation window. And behind the glass, a single chair. Someone had been watching. Had been watching for years. Underscore 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 underscore. The aftermath. I never saw Summit Park again. The loan defaulted. An unknown company bought it and demolished everything. They built apartments over it. They've never been occupied. And the billionaire's son. He owns several amusement parks now. One of them is near where I live. I've thought about going, just to check. But I don't have to, because I know. Somewhere in that park, some ride in some forgotten corner, has a track B. What do you think about the hidden track B? Have you ever experienced something that felt like a dark secret? Let me know in the comments below. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. In 2 miles, take exit 19 for Valley Park. Siri's voice chirped from my sister's phone. Charlotte, turn that off. I know where I'm going, I said, trying to sound confident. You sure about that? I mean, it's been a couple of decades, she teased. Mark, please. Like I could ever forget where Adventure Valley is. Come on, we spent every summer there. Just as I said that, I swerved briefly into the oncoming lane as Charlotte thrust her arm in front of my face, pointing excitedly out the window. There it is, Adventure Valley. Oh my God, what ride is that? That coaster. It was called Steel something, right? No, wait, that's Mayhem Mountain, isn't it? I gently pushed her arm back to her seat, though I couldn't fault her for her excitement. I was trying hard to control my own giddiness. It felt like we were kids again, yelling and bouncing in the backseat of our parents' car as the first shining rails and wooden planks of the park's roller coasters came into view above the treetops. That's the Steel Viper, I told her. Mayhem Mountain's on the other end of the park. And that wooden coaster over there, that's Excalibur. Oh yeah, I remember those. I was always too much of a wuss to ride the Viper, but I rode the hell out of Excalibur. Well, Charlotte, you're an adult now. I think it's time to take on the Viper. As long as the contractors have tested it and given it the okay, I'm in. That was really the question, wasn't it? We didn't know which rides had been inspected and cleared and which ones hadn't. I'd left Brandon several voicemails asking about it since he was the one in charge of everything. But with how fast things had been moving since we bought the park, I couldn't fault him for being a busy man. If you'd told 12-year-old me that my crazy, hyper, wild-eyed friend Brandon Decker would end up graduating cum laude from Northwestern Business School, I would have laughed in your face. Brandon? No way. Tyler? Maybe. But never Brandon. In fact, half the reason I think he chose a business degree was because of Adventure Valley. When the park closed in 1989, Brandon had gathered us all together in his basement. With a gravitas and solemnness I'd never seen in him before or since, he asked us to make a pact. At the time, the promise had been the most serious vow that 5 12-year-olds could ever make. High off an entire summer of Adventure Valley, we agreed with all the ceremony of a meeting of Parliament that we would one day come together and buy Adventure Valley Amusement Park. Of course, back then, we planned to just buy it and ride the roller coasters into the ground. We decided which friends from school we'd let in and which enemies would be barred from the gates. It had always been our park, and it was only right that we should have it. It had taken 20 years, but we eventually did fulfill our promise, with a hell of a lot of pushing from Brandon and a sizable offering of collateral from Tyler. The bank had agreed to give us the multi-million-dollar loan to buy, repair, refurbish, and reopen the park. The size of the loan that the 6 of us were responsible for gave me nightmares for several weeks. How would this place ever turn a profit? It had been closed decades ago after operating in the red for several years. The county had experienced a high number of runaways and missing persons in the area in the last years of the 1980s. The entire region was on edge as the cases mounted, and people in the area became depressed and suspicious of each other. It had absolutely killed park attendance. But seeing the first cresting waves of roller coaster rails through the trees made me all but forget about my financial worries. This was Adventure Valley, for Christ's sake. If we opened the gates, people would come. There. That's our exit, Charlotte squawked. I pulled off the interstate and took a left under the bridge. Less than a mile later, we came upon the acres of the park's parking lot to our right. We turned in and drove all the way up to the front near the gates, where several other cars were parked. A Lexus, a Mini Cooper, an old Chevy, and a Honda Civic, another rental car like ours. Looks like we're the last ones here, Charlotte said. She was right. As we pulled up next to the Lexus, I noticed a group of people standing next to the ticket booth, waving to us excitedly. Oh my God, is that Tyler? Jesus, he's lost some weight. He's so skinny now. And Brandon's losing his hair. Holy crap, is that Koji? Koji got hot. Calm down, Paris Hilton. These guys are my friends. They're off limits to you. Same rules as when we were teenagers. Besides, half of them are married. Which half? I raised an eyebrow at Charlotte and shook my head in amused bewilderment. My little sister never had outgrown her boy craziness. Wait, who's that? Charlotte asked as we got out of the car. Oh, what? That's Scott. You know Scott. Not Scott. Scott looks exactly the same. The girl next to Scott. Oh, I had put this off so long, but I'd actually forgotten to tell my sister at all. That's Danny, Scott's girlfriend. Danny, as in Danielle Brewer. Well, yeah. My sister gave me such a horrified look that you'd think I'd betrayed her to her death, but it was fleeting and quickly replaced by a sly smile. Fine by me. I'm sure she's not the same person she was in high school. We're all adults now, right? Now, come on, let's go. A sigh of relief escaped my chest as I slammed the car door and followed Charlotte over to the entrance. Though I saw most of these guys every year, seeing us all here together, standing at the ticket booths of Adventure Valley, brought me a kind of happiness I hadn't experienced in many years. Mark freaking Lantis. I can't believe it, Tyler said in his edgy, commanding voice that probably made as many employees shudder and scatter. But I knew him like a brother, so his bravado just made me laugh. Yeah, can you believe it? I asked as I gave him a hug and a slap on the back. Back at the front gates, $15 a day doesn't seem so ridiculous now. 15 a day, yes, Brandon said, shaking his head. By me math, it looks like we'll be charging about 15 a day. Yes, Brandon said, shaking his head. By me math, it looks like we'll be charging about 65 a day. I'll pay it. Charlotte smiled as she gave Koji a hug. Are people really going to pay 65 a day? Koji asked. And me and even Disneyland only charges 65 a day. Koji asked. And even Disneyland only charges 85, and at least there you get access to 2 parks. How could I forget? Brandon shook his head. One of our investors works for the mouse. Pity they won't let you design any artwork for this place. Come on, man. I'm not an artist. I'm an engineer. Don't you mean Imagineer? Charlotte winked at him. Koji sighed and shook his head. Yeah, I do. As Brandon and Charlotte teased Koji, I made my way over to the side of the ticket booth where Scott and his girlfriend were conversing. I didn't know why Scott was being so standoffish, but I thought it might have something to do with the investment. Scott, the least well-off of us 6, worked at his dad's collision shop and hadn't had a whole lot of money to invest. I thought maybe he was embarrassed about the money, but now, watching him lean against the booth with slowly shifting eyes, I realized it wasn't that at all. Scott was just stoned. Same old Scott. What's up, burnout? My brother, I haven't seen you in like 15 years. How about a bro hug? Scott smiled and pushed off the wall to come give me a quick hug. Hey, how's it going, man? Look at you. What is your diet? Rabbit food and lettuce. You're not going to get any ladies with that skinny body. Your mom doesn't seem to mind. Hey, Mark. I'm Danny. Do you remember me? Danny Brewer. Scott's girlfriend gave me a shy smile and stuck out her hand for a stiff handshake. I think so. You were in my sister's class, right? Danny had the decency to look embarrassed. Yeah, but we weren't really friends. That's putting it lightly, I thought. We were freshmen when you guys were seniors. Yeah, I do remember that. Maybe I should just get it over with. I called Charlotte over, and the reintroduction of the 2 girls, while awkward, was over pretty quickly to everyone's relief. We were all eager to get into the park. It was odd not stopping at the window for tickets and even odder to walk around the rusting turnstiles of the front gates. I delighted in reminding myself that we owned this place now. Brandon gave us a tour of the park, not so much of the geography. We all knew that inside and out, but the hypothetical layout and reorganization of the park as he saw it. The Excalibur is going to need the most amount of work, according to Rich, my head contractor. A roller coaster made of wood, exposed to the elements for all these years. Well, we'll keep as much of the original structure as is safe, but we might have to rebuild most of it. Do we have the money for that? Scott asked loudly from where he walked behind us with Danny. Yeah, Tyler said. We have the money for that. Ah, Mr. Moneybags. That mini dealership treating you good. I nudged him hard with my shoulder. Tyler stumbled but kept enough composure to push me back into a passing churro stall. Oh, those 6 BMW dealerships are treating me very well. Well enough to serve as the sizable collateral we needed, Brandon added. So Charlotte ran up behind us and threw her arms around Tyler and Koji. Can we ride some rides? Are you kidding? Why do you think we're here? I'm just here for Mayhem Mountain, I said, clapping my hands and rubbing them together eagerly. Brandon threw up his hands. All right, fine. I thought you guys would be interested in how your investment is coming along. Yeah, all we're interested in is the project's ROI and, more importantly, which rides have passed the safety inspection. Brandon stopped walking and tried to look annoyed, but failing that, he smiled a little. Over half of them are rideable. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Is Steel Viper open? Yep, that one's good. What about Snapdragon? That one's good to go too. Renegade Falls. The water's not on yet. High Roller. Yes. Space Spin? Oh yeah. Power Tower? They're doing the inspection this week. There was only one ride I really cared about, mine and Brandon's favorite. What about Mayhem Mountain? Yes, he answered. The collective groans from the rest of the group were immediate. Mayhem Mountain had always been our thing. The others had always been happy to ride High Roller and Snapdragon into exhaustion, but Brandon and I always split off toward the end of the day to ride Mayhem Mountain into the twilight hours. God, I hate that ride. It's boring as hell. I mean, I helped design something similar for Disneyland Hong Kong. We put it in Fantasyland, for Christ's sake. Hey, that ride is awesome. It's long, and it goes upside down. Even Charlotte is too scared to ride it. I'm not scared of that ride. It just gives me the creeps. Something about it just, I don't know, seems off. All right, look, we'll start at this end of the park and work our way toward the back. That way, we can ride every ride that's passed inspection, including Mayhem Mountain and Snapdragon, Tyler added, and the others nodded excitedly. Yes, every ride. And of course we can ride them, as many times as we want. Hell yes, brother, Koji said, high-fiving Brandon. We headed down the street toward Space Spin. Our progress through the park was blissfully slow. Everyone wanted to ride every ride multiple times, and one person always had to stay in the loading area to operate the ride. It only took an hour or two to forget that I was a fully grown 35-year-old man, being back here, running through the line queues with my friends, arguing over who got the first row of the first car. It was like being 12 again. Still, my eye was constantly drawn up over the buildings into the distance, to the back of the park where the high, gleaming rails of Mayhem Mountain shone in the unobscured sun. There would be no arguing over who got the front row on that coaster. It was me and Brandon. It was always me and Brandon. Charlotte, Tyler, and Koji were the most like children, constantly running ahead and arguing over which ride to go on next, yelling back to ask Brandon if this one or that one had been cleared by the contractors. Brandon and I held back from the group a bit, discussing ideas and possible improvements for the park. Scott and Danny took up the rear of the group, quietly talking and lighting joints. When we arrived at the Enterprise, a simple ride that consisted of spinning cars on a circular track, I offered to flip the switch while the rest of the group rode the ride. The Enterprise always made me sick when we were kids. Brandon offered to stay on the platform with me to chat while everyone else rode the ride. I flipped the switch to turn the ride on, and as the cars spun away from the loading area, the Enterprise's signage came into view. I sighed. All day, I've been trying to ignore the bright graffiti sprayed all over the park, but the words painted over the signage for the Enterprise were impossible to ignore. Where did the missing kids go? And the rest of the graffiti in the park was much the same. Most said things like, "Where are they?" "Runaway Row." "Find Ryan Kinski." "Missing," "Are dead now." Similar sayings could be found in town, sprayed across a few dilapidated buildings in the industrial district. Brandon's eyes avoided the sign, but I could tell he was thinking about it too. "Do you think the reason they shut this park down? I mean, do you see that being an issue for park attendants?" I asked as casually as I could. Brandon was quiet for a few moments as he waited for the ride to slow to a stop so he could flip the switch again. "No, I don't think so. Low attendance issues aren't usually what shut parks down." "They aren't?" This surprised me. "Nope. When we were negotiating the sale of the park, I was given access to the park's financials from the 80s. So they weren't operating at a loss." "Oh, they were. But this park had operated in the red since opening day in the 70s. Half of their revenue was being fed back into something called county services. Whatever that is, the bank couldn't tell me. And believe me, I tried to find out." "County services?" "Yep. Real bizarre. And according to the paperwork, the park was closed because the owner didn't want to live here anymore, and he couldn't be bothered to wait for a decent offer on the property. So he just sold it back to the bank for next to nothing." "So he was a rich guy?" I leaned back against the railing to stretch my back. "And an idiot." "Yes, to an extreme in both cases. The owner of the park was Abel Bassetti. Abel Bassetti. Related to that French billionaire." "I'm guessing." Brandon nodded. "Michael Bassetti. He built this park for his son in the 70s. Abel was never really what we would call business inclined." "Yeah, I've always heard him described as, simple." I can't believe the son of a billionaire lives in this area. Well, not anymore. He moved 1 decade ago. I shook my head in disbelief. Who would have ever thought that our simple little park was owned by a famous billionaire's son? Hell, I may have even sat next to him on rides and had no idea. You guys want to go again? Brandon yelled to the others as the ride again came to a stop. I'm ready to move on, Koji yelled back. Anybody else want to ride again? A chorus of groans ensued. It was near 5 o'clock when we finally arrived at Mayhem Mountain. As the sun began to set, a familiar panic and urgency welled up in the pit of my stomach. It took a moment for me to realize that we didn't have to leave when the park closed this time because the park didn't close. We could stay up until sunup if we wanted to. As I eagerly approached the turnstile for Mayhem Mountain, Tyler spoke up behind me. Listen, can we run into town and grab something to eat before we ride Mayhem? You really want to ride Mayhem after we eat? Good point. There's only one loop, I said. Don't forget the inline roll. Yep, 2. Plus, it's a 2-minute ride. If your food isn't sitting well, you've got a long wait till it's over. Look, let's ride it a couple of times, then go eat. When we come back, we'll see how we feel. Everyone nodded, and we started walking through the line queues up to the platform. When we reached the loading dock, I was excited to see our favorite green car sitting on the track. Seat 1. Brandon and I yelled simultaneously as the train car came into view, and everyone behind us groaned. I'm staying here. I'll just work the launch pad thingy. Still scared after all these years. Shut up, burnout. Scott laughed and tousled her hair before running and jumping into the first car behind Brandon and me. Danny got in next to him, and then Tyler and Koji took the second car. We pulled the shoulder restraints down, and they locked in. Ready? Yep, Brandon yelled back. Send the car through. Charlotte pulled the lever, and the brakes disengaged as the car moved forward. I turned to Brandon. Did we get the green car on purpose? I yelled to him as the coaster clacked around the load platform and began the clattery climb up the first lift hill. Yeah, we sent cars through here all morning, but I made sure Rich knew to leave the green machine in the loading bay. Awesome. As the train climbed up the lift hill, I made no attempt to hide my utter glee. I looked over the expansive park and couldn't believe it was mine. Every track, every car, every turnstile, every screw, from the front gate to the overflow parking lot and the back. It was all ours. How I wished I could go back in time and tell a young me, waiting in the 2-hour line for Mayhem Mountain, one day you're going to own this place. As we crested the hill, the train fell into the first drop. I realized I essentially had gone back in time. At least I was screaming like a 12-year-old, as was everyone else behind me. We dipped into the first tester hill and then banked hard and up to the second lift hill. We dropped from there down into the vertical loop, banked around a set of gift shops, up briefly, then down a small hill into the inline roll. When we arrived back at the loading bay, we were all screaming and hollering. Charlotte didn't even have to ask. She just smiled at me and sent us through again. We went twice more before we finally got off the ride. Koji walked over to check out the control panel while the rest of us taunted my sister. You sure you don't want to go, Char? It's awesome. Nah, I'm good. I have no problem being the carny for this ride. Come on, Charlotte. Just one time. One time, and we'll leave you alone. No way. Not interested. I'll ride anything else, though. Hey, do you guys know what Track B is? Track B? What do you mean? Brandon walked over to Koji at the control board and raised an eyebrow. Huh, that's weird. It's probably just the track they use to get the cars into the storage bay, Scott said with a shrug. No, that's called a transfer track. Track B has to be something else. Yeah, well, I've been on this ride enough times to know there's no other track. Yeah, he has. So, should we try it? Hell no. If you don't know what Track B is, that means the contractors don't know about it either, which means it hasn't been inspected in at least 20 years. That's suicide. Look, if track B exists, then even the most incompetent of engineers would have found it during an inspection, and Rich cleared this entire ride. It's probably just the ride in reverse. We're good. Well, I'm in, announced Scott from the other side of the track, though Danny didn't look quite on board with the idea. Mark: Yeah, I guess I'm in. What's the worst thing that could happen? We get funneled into a repair bay. All right then. I'm in too, Tyler said hesitantly. Well, here goes nothing, Koji shrugged. He flipped the switch over to track B, and a moment later, a loud metallic scraping some distance away filled the park. The sound lasted almost a minute. I studied the familiar silver roller coaster under the pink sky of the setting sun, but I saw no physical changes to the track. I looked over at Brandon, and a shrug of his shoulders told me he didn't either. Shall we? Scott asked, gesturing to the train cars we just disembarked. I gave Charlotte a questioning look, but she shook her head emphatically. No. So it was just the six of us again. It's only right you two take the bow of the ship, Tyler said, giving a salute. Oh, captains, my captains. I laughed and hopped into the right side of the front row. Brandon crawled into the seat next to me. Tyler and Koji got in behind us, and Scott and Danny took the back. We pulled the shoulder bars down, and they locked into place. Are you sure about this? Charlotte asked when everyone was settled. Danny said something from her place a few rows back, but all I heard was Brandon yelling, "Pull it!" The brakes released, and the train rolled away from the platform and into the twilight of dusk. The lights had lit up on the track where we'd been arguing, and the roller coaster looked absolutely beautiful. I was filled with awe and reverence at what this place truly meant to me and my friends. It was a symbol of our youth and innocence, and the blissful ignorance of the world. It was our own little bubble of happiness. The coaster again climbed the lift hill, and from the top, Brandon and I studied the track. But in those few seconds, I saw no difference. Brandon looked over, and I shook my head at him disappointedly. By the time we reached the vertical loop halfway through the ride, it was clear that there was no track B, but it was hard to be upset because I was still on Mayhem Mountain and still found it an impossible challenge not to smile. We banked around the now brightly lit gift shops, up the small tester hill, and then back down to the inline roll, except the inline roll was suddenly above us. We missed it. Instead, the track now descended into a large square hole in the ground behind the gift shops, and we were headed directly into it. I was in too much shock to scream or even move. The black hole swallowed us up in an instant, and we descended into complete darkness. I felt a comfortable pressure leave my shoulders and realized that the shoulder bars had been released. I gripped the front ledge of my seat and heard the terrified screams of my friends behind me as the roller coaster suddenly spun into what felt like an inline roll. I was too scared to do anything but hold on for dear life, though some part of my brain registered that the G-forces of the roll probably would have been enough to keep me in my seat even if I had let go. Probably. We came out of the inline roll and dropped again hard. As the roller coaster dropped, the room suddenly lit up around us, and I saw the track below arching up into a light tester hill. As we hit the bottom of the hill, the shoulder bars lowered mechanically. The car went over a small hill, and then braked to start up another tall lift hill. I took my first breath since dropping through the ground and looked around, tuning out the screams of Danny and Tyler behind me. We were in what could be described as a cavernous room, and I only assumed it stretched to the farthest reaches of the park above. There were lots of vertical loops, high drops, and sharp curves that put the track perpendicular to the ground throughout the entire subterranean building. Lamps dotted the wall every 30 feet. They put out a dreary, yellowed glow as far as the eye could see, but many were burnt out, and in parts, the track disappeared into darkness. But in the dull yellow edges of the light, I saw something that registered in me a terror beyond death. Far away from us, in a section of shadowy track, I saw the high crest of a peak hill, which reached almost to the ceiling of the giant room, and then the track just ended. Suddenly, I felt the horrible reality of the world outside my mind begin to bleed in. Danny was screaming uncontrollably. Tyler was crying, bawling even. Koji was yelling at Brandon, who was looking straight at me, hitting my leg hard, and repeating my name as the cars continued to climb. I finally gave him my attention. I didn't want to be alone with the fear anymore. "What is it?" was all I could think to say. "We have to get off this ride. We have to get off this ride, Mark." "I know, man. We're going to die." "I know, man," I yelled as we reached the top of a lift hill and dropped over the other side. I squeezed my eyes shut until I felt the shoulder bars once again release and bit my lip to keep from crying. I opened my eyes and choked as I watched the track ahead of us bend up into a vertical loop. I reached up and tried to pull my shoulder bar down, but it was locked in place. Hang on to the seats. As we approached the loop, I felt the brakes engaging, slowing the car, and a tow cable catch behind my feet. We were being pulled through the loop, but too slowly for gravity to keep us in our seats. As the train began to invert, I felt my feet rise from the floor of the car. My hair fell over my face and I left the seat. I closed my eyes to try to block out the screams of terror from behind me. I concentrated on my death grip on the ledge of my seat as we rounded the track. We remained upside down for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the pressure began to ease. My butt dropped back into my seat and my feet to the floor. The white noise subsided from my ears, and I heard Koji screaming. "Tyler, he fell out. He fell. He's dead, man. He's dead. He hit the track down there." Brandon yelled at me, wide-eyed and crazy looking. I was finally seeing the Brandon from my youth. The shoulder bars descended again, this time locking in tighter. We came out of the loop and sped up and down several tester hills. I tried to study the track ahead of us as we went through the safer parts. I thought I saw water reflecting off the metal rails somewhere in the distance. Brandon sobbed in his seat. "Mark, what are we going to do? I don't want to die, man. I don't want to die. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry. I'm scared too." We banked around a corner of the room, and the shoulder bars released again. This time, we dove into a curve that put the side of the train parallel to the ground, and it was a long drop. I gripped the edge of the seat tightly as before, but this time, I kept my eyes open and was able to catch Brandon as he began to slip out of his seat. By the time the train righted itself, I couldn't tell who'd been lost. Most of the screaming behind me had turned to loud sobbing or silence. The shoulder bar didn't re-engage, and I felt the car's brakes slow the train again. I didn't have to look to know what was coming next. It was another inverted loop. This one was tall and large, and I could tell we'd be upside down for longer. Someone behind me began screaming again. Danny, I think, as I tried to take measured breaths and position my hurting back under the lip of the seat. Brandon did the same and looked over at me as the car started up the loop, with tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to die in here, man." I shook my head back at him because I could think of nothing to say. I felt tears leave my eyes as we reached the tipping point of the loop, and my feet again left the floor. Before we were even completely upside down, I felt my back begin to slip down the seat. I thought if I lost my grip, I could try to grab for the shoulder bars when I fell out of the car. The car suddenly stopped, and I opened my eyes again to see we were completely inverted. I grunted loudly at the pain and immense effort it was taking to keep my grip on the seat. The car started to move again, slowly, and I heard Brandon say something behind me. I looked over at him just before he slid out of the car. 1 second he was there next to me, and the next, he was falling away from the car. I saw Brandon try to grab the shoulder bar on the way out, but he couldn't keep his grip. I watched him fall and saw him break his back on the track below and stop moving. I stared down at him as the car continued moving slowly around the loop, and he stared back up at me, dead or dying. By the time the car hit him on the way out of the loop, it was completely gone. The shoulder bar re-engaged, and we went through a dreadfully long period where nothing happened. We were secured in our seats by the restraints as the coaster spent what felt like several minutes racing over hills, banks, and curbs, even an inline roll. Without the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I felt the shock begin to wear off. It was replaced by a panic and fear unlike any I'd ever experienced, and I decided that was the point of this section of the track, to build and facilitate an unbearable fear. I felt the brakes engage finally and looked ahead to find the loop we were surely entering, but there was none. We were high, almost to the top of the ceiling, and we slowed to a stop on a straightaway. Directly ahead was a drop, and at the bottom of the hill, a series of 4 different tracks with a transfer track just before they split off. Each track had 5 or so feet of color, red, orange, green, and blue, before racing off in different directions. I felt an urgent shaking of my shoulder and turned around to hear what Koji was saying. "Which track are we connected to?" I looked at the transfer track. Green. Where does green go? I tried to trace the green track through the building, constantly losing it and finding it again. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to end at the lift hill I'd seen earlier, the hill with no track at the top. "It ends at that hill." I yelled back at him and pointed. Danny cried louder. While we were stopped, I rubbed my hurting hands together as I looked down at them. I noticed something new in the car. At some point, a small blinking panel had flipped over in the wall of the front of the car. It had 4 colored buttons and an odd analog timer. The timer was so old and damaged that, though the numbers were clearly changing, I couldn't see how long we had. "We have to choose," I said and explained what I was looking at. "Can you see which track ends where?" I followed all the tracks as best I could, but the rails circled and slid in between each other. It was hard to tell which track went where. "I think the blue track ends in that big pool in the corner. The red track ends in a wall. The orange just drops into a hole in the floor, like the one we came down here through. I think. There's no way out," Scott said from the second car. His voice was unsettlingly calm. "They're just telling us how we're going to die. We can still find a way out of this," I answered quietly, more to myself than him. "Choose the pool," Scott said, and I could hear the tears in his voice. "I've heard drowning isn't an awful death. I've heard it's calming at the end." "No, choose the hole in the floor. It's possible it drops down into another cavern like this. There might be more track, which means more time to figure out how to live." "You don't think we'd be the first to choose that option, do you? And no one that went missing ever came back. There's just more death in that hole. I don't want to die like this, and at least it's a chance." Danny was still whimpering in the back and offered no suggestion. It seemed the decision was up to me, and I had to make it fast. I knew I didn't want to die by dropping off the track. I didn't want to drown. Perhaps the quickest death was the wall. More than likely, we would all be killed instantly. Less suffering. Less time to think about our fates. But the truth was, I wasn't entirely positive which track ended where. It was all educated guesswork, and my time was up. The orange. "Let's go down to the second floor, if there is one." Scott and Danny said nothing, and Koji choked out the last words I'd ever hear him say. "Please push it before it chooses for us." Before I could think about it any longer, I pushed the orange button and committed us to whatever death it led to. We heard the metallic scraping of the track transferring below. Once the orange track was securely connected, the brakes on the car released, and the train rolled slowly toward the drop. Danny started screaming again as we dropped down the hill. I got a better view of the orange track. There was a vertical loop ahead that didn't look as high as the others we'd been through. In fact, it looked like there was a chance the fall wouldn't kill us. And if the shoulder bars disengaged for that loop, we might have a shot at living through this. "Let yourself fall out of the loop, the one up there," I yelled back to everyone behind me. No one responded to me, which didn't matter because I didn't think I'd have the courage to let go of the seat anyway. We raced along the track, in and out of banks and curves. At one point, we passed along the pool, and I looked down below the water's surface. The track ended above an even deeper pool. I could see the shadows of several coaster cars at the very bottom. I suddenly felt the brakes engage, and I realized we were coming to a loop. I tested the shoulder bar by pushing on it, but it stayed locked. I was somewhat relieved at that moment to know I wouldn't have to make the decision to fall out now or gamble on the orange track. But suddenly, the restraints released as we started up the loop. I gripped the lip of the seat tightly and turned my head back to look down. It looked like we were very high, and I only hoped that the ground was the loosely packed dirt that I thought it looked like. I had to choose now, to fall or to hold. I chose to fall. As I began to slide up the seat, I yelled to the others to let go and fall out of the car, and then I closed my eyes and let go. I felt my head crack the shoulder bar on the way out. It wasn't like a slow-motion fall. It was over before I realized that I'd actually let go. One moment, I felt intense pain as my head hit the bar, and in the same moment, I realized I was on the ground. I hadn't even had time to realize the possibility of hitting the track below or getting run over by the cars. I opened my eyes in time to watch the car speed over the track above me. The pain didn't hit me all at once. I had one long, blissful second before I felt it, and then I was in agony. I had hoped my body was so in shock that I wouldn't feel much of the pain, but I felt it all. I concentrated on keeping my eyes open and trying to catalog the damage. There was blood on my clothes, but I didn't know what part of my body it was coming from. I heard screaming as well, but I didn't know if it was in my head or coming from my friends as they approached the end. I didn't want to move, didn't think it was safe to move, but I knew I had to if only to pull out my phone. With trembling fingers, I pulled the thing from my pocket and brought it to my face, trying to focus on the screen, but it was shattered and refused to even turn on. I threw it away and then realized the silence. Their ride had ended. With a great amount of effort, I rolled over onto my stomach and dragged my broken body across the ground toward where I thought I remembered seeing the hole. I crawled for what seemed like an hour, and maybe it was. Sometimes I tried to stand or even kneel, but the pain in my back and ribs was too great. I passed out several times from shock and pain, but eventually, I made it to where the track disappeared into the ground. I pulled myself to the ledge and looked down inside the hole. The track ended just below the surface. It was a natural shaft with walls made of rock. I didn't know how deep it went, and I didn't want to. It was a fate I'd only narrowly escaped, but then I thought of my friends. Koji? My voice echoed loudly down the shaft. No answer. Scott. I reached for a nearby screw and dropped it down the hole. It took half a minute to land, and when it did, it was with a tink as it hit something metal. The small sound echoed up the shaft and out into the cavernous room, and I realized this place was built with acoustics in mind. I rolled over onto my back and studied everything I could see from where I was, staving off my body's desire to pass out again. I felt nothing but numbness when I finally saw what I was looking for, a long, panoramic window in the far wall. I knew what track B was for and finally let myself slip away into the darkness. I remember very little of my rescue. There were lots of people in uniform and my sister yelling in pain, lots of pain. I was in and out on the way to the hospital, but I remember I passed through the room behind the window at some point. From my stretcher, through the chaos, I saw in that room a single chair facing the window. It was covered in a deep layer of dust. I was never visited by anyone official, let alone asked to give a statement. Charlotte stayed by my side at the hospital for months while I recovered. She wouldn't say much about that day, although she finally did tell me something. She said that they wouldn't let her ride with me to the hospital, and that someone offered her a ride. On that drive, she'd been spoken to by 2 people who had convinced her to never speak of what had happened, and to convince me of the same. Whatever they threatened her with had her begging me to agree, and I did. At the same time, I am still, to this day, learning to walk without aid. I never saw Mayhem Mountain again. The loan defaulted and Adventure Valley was bought up by an unknown LLC, which bulldozed it and built a block of apartments over the top. They're still empty to this day. I don't like the dark anymore. It reminds me of the horror my friends experienced as they looked down and saw the track end before they disappeared into that hole. I try not to think about what they must have felt as they fell down the shaft in complete darkness, strapped to a roller coaster, waiting for the terrible end. I'd wished I'd chosen the pool, if only to save them from that fate. As for the billionaire's son, he was only simple in the fact that he was a man of simple tastes. And he still is. I looked him up once, only a few years ago. He owns several amusement parks now, all sizable but small enough to be popular only in their specific regions. In fact, one is not very far from where I live now. I've thought about going many times, just to check in, just to see. But then I realized I probably didn't need to search all the rides in the park to know. Because I know that somewhere in that park, some ride in some corner has a track B. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long, and I haven't really put out many updates. Things have been a little hectic, and I don't want to get into too many details, but there's just been a few things going on. As well as I've had a bunch of setbacks with stories, and I think I mentioned that in one of the recent compilations. But it just seemed like there was just one thing after another, and it kind of started to make me feel burnt out a little bit. And that definitely played a role in why it's taken me so long to get back on top of things. But yeah, I'm feeling better. I'm excited about some new videos I'm working on. One thing that I am going to do differently going forward is I'm going to not really mention too much about what I'm working on, just because I know that, but yeah, setbacks happen. Sometimes things happen, and I know it's really disappointing for me to say, oh, I'm working on this. It'll be done, next week, and then it just doesn't come out. And I want to avoid that in the future. I'll really only mention projects that are coming out when they're basically done. But yeah, I hope you liked the story. The story was by C.K. Walker, who was also the author of Borrasca. And something I really liked about the story is how it kind of just felt more like a classic creepypasta, kind of like Ben Drowned at Disney. And it was really fun to do the sound design for this one because I don't really get to do one very often where there's like roller coasters and stuff. I'm really curious to see what all of you think. I'm going to take some extra time today to just hang out in the comments because I want to try to reply to as many comments as I can and just get back to interacting with you all, since I know there's been a little bit of a gap where I've kind of just been gone. But yeah, if you leave a comment, I'll be sure to reply to it. And with that said, I hope you have a great day. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The small town of Pine Lake, nestled deep in the foggy forests of the Pacific Northwest, was known for its eerie silence and the occasional urban legend, but nothing could have prepared the townsfolk for the tragedy of the Vance family. Dr. Daniel Vance, a brilliant but reclusive physicist, had once been a respected professor at a prestigious university, but after a sudden revelation, a calculation that hinted at an impending global catastrophe, he abandoned his career, liquidated his assets, and moved his family to the remote woods outside Pine Lake. There, he built a state-of-the-art bunker, a fortress designed to withstand the end of the world. For years, the Vances were a mystery to the town. They rarely ventured out, and when they did, it was only to make bizarre requests for supplies, everything from freeze-dried food to industrial-grade batteries. The townsfolk whispered about the family, speculating about their strange lifestyle, but no one could have guessed the horrors that awaited them in that bunker. When the pandemic hit, the Vances decided to test their bunker's capabilities. They locked themselves inside, determined to survive without any outside help. For 3 months, there was no sign of them. Then, one night, a faint distress call crackled over the sheriff's radio. The voice was that of a child, trembling and barely audible. "Help us, please, we're trapped." The sheriff and his deputies rushed to the coordinates, only to find the bunker's massive steel door sealed shut. It took hours to cut through the reinforced metal, and when they finally breached the entrance, they were met with an unsettling sight. The bunker was empty. No bodies, no survivors. Just a labyrinth of rooms filled with rotting food, overturned furniture, and strange, dark stains that seemed to seep into every surface. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls were covered in frantic scribbles, equations, diagrams, and the repeated phrase, 5 doors, not 6. 6 didn't make it. The police left that day, vowing to return and investigate further. But they never did. The bunker was sealed off, and the case was quietly closed. Years later, I found myself standing in front of that bunker. My dog, Ripley, had gone missing during a hike, and his trail had led me to the overgrown entrance. The door hung open, its lock scorched and broken. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air was damp and heavy, and the walls seemed to close in around me. The first thing I noticed was the writing, desperate, manic scrawls that covered every inch of the concrete. 5 doors, not 6. 6 didn't make it. The words sent a chill down my spine. I pressed on, following Ripley's faint paw prints deeper into the bunker. The living quarters were a nightmare. Furniture was overturned, and the floor was littered with broken dishes and moldy blankets. The walls were stained with dark, crusty patches that looked like dried blood. But what terrified me most were the chairs. Each chair had been modified with wooden beams bolted to the backrests, as if someone had tried to prop up the occupants. And on the seats were strange, human-shaped stains, imprints of bodies that had melted into the fabric. In the corner of the room, I found an old TV. It flickered to life as I approached, showing grainy infrared footage of the Vance family. Daniel Vance stood in the center of the frame, his face gaunt and hollow. Behind him, his family sat at the dinner table, rotting corpses with glowing eyes. Miranda was the first to fall ill. Daniel's voice crackled through the speakers. We thought it was just a cold, but then the others started showing symptoms. Fever, vomiting. Then, something worse. The camera panned to the table, revealing the horrifying truth. The Vances were dead, their bodies propped up in their chairs like macabre puppets. Daniel moved among them, tucking a napkin under his wife's chin, ruffling his son's hair, as if they were still alive. I don't know when it started, Daniel continued, but there's something down here with us. Something that doesn't belong. It took our radios, our phones, even the lights, and now it's coming for me. The screen went dark, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence. I found Ripley huddled in a corner, trembling and silent. As I scooped him into my arms, I noticed something on the wall, a crude diagram of the bunker. The bottom level was marked with a red X and labeled storage. Against my better judgment, I descended the stairs to the lower level. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of rot became unbearable. At the bottom, I found a door that shouldn't have been there. It was old, its wood warped and splintered, and it radiated a palpable sense of dread. I reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, I heard a sound, a wet, rattling breath coming from the other side. Something was in there, something alive. I turned and ran, Ripley clutched tightly in my arms. I didn't stop until I was back in the sunlight, the bunker's entrance looming behind me like a gaping maw. I never went back to that bunker. The sheriff's department refused to reopen the case, and the townsfolk avoided the area, claiming it was cursed. But sometimes, late at night, I hear a faint voice on the radio, a child's voice, whispering for help. And I can't help but wonder what happened to the 6th door. What do you think was behind that door? Have you ever felt the presence of something that shouldn't be there?